Hey guys, tonight we're talking about bread. Yes, bread. The humble crusted pillow that's followed you since before your great-great-great-great-grandma knew what an oven was. And tonight, you're going to find out why medieval bread, the kind baked by candlelight in soot-streaked ovens, might have been the superfood your gut dreams about, while the white, squishy loaf on your kitchen counter is possibly plotting your slow demise. Now let's be clear, you probably won't survive this. Not because the story's scary, but because once you learn what bread used to be, you'll never look at your sad, plastic-wrapped, 20-ingredient supermarket loaf the same way again. It's okay, change is good, especially when it comes with a good crumb and maybe a smear of butter. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I mean, you know the algorithm gods don't bless me with barley just for fun. I need your clicks like a peasant needs his crust. Where are you tuning in from tonight? Drop your city and the local time in the comments, because I'm curious which time zones are secretly obsessed with the history of bread. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're waking up in a cold stone room. The air smells faintly of damp wood and hearth smoke. It's probably somewhere in England, maybe Normandy or Flanders, and the year is something like 1250. There are no alarms, just the whisper of wind through a thatched roof, and the rhythmic cluck of chickens plotting their next move outside. But you're not thinking about chickens, you're thinking about bread. Because you're always thinking about bread. It's what you'll eat in some form every day of your life, multiple times a day, maybe with beans or soup or just salt if things are tight. Your stomach growls and you reach for the small loaf wrapped in cloth near the hearth. It's brown, crusty, uneven, baked 3 days ago, but still edible. There's a sour tang to it when you bite in. Not unpleasant, just alive. You feel it nourish you almost instantly. The grainy texture leaves crumbs in your teeth, but it fills you. This is bread doing what bread was meant to do. In the medieval world, bread isn't a side dish, it is the meal. For peasants and kings alike, it's the foundation. You might get some turnips or boiled cabbage if you're lucky, a slice of salted meat on feast days, but day in and day out, it's bread that keeps you alive. Not the kind with caramel colouring and natural flavours, but something elemental. Ground grain, water, salt, and time. That's it, and that's all it needs. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but people back then weren't that healthy, right? Here's the twist. In many ways, their bread made them healthier. Despite poor sanitation, wild medical theories, and an obsession with bleeding people to rebalance their humours, medieval diets, especially among the working class, had some surprising strengths. Their bread was full of whole grain fibre, fermented to reduce gluten, and baked fresh in ways that didn't include a chemistry degree. You're not alone in your morning bread ritual. The entire village depends on it. Every household has a sack of grain, ground at the local mill, a place that's more community lifeline than quaint cottagecore fantasy. Without flour, you don't eat. And flour means bread. Always bread. Sometimes it's called trencher bread, because it literally becomes your plate. A thick slice set under stewed meat or vegetables soaking up everything. When you're done eating, you eat the plate. Who needs Tupperware? Now here's a historical tidbit that's easy to miss. In 13th century England, bread wasn't just food, it was regulated by law. The Assize of Bread and Ale, first issued in 1266, set strict guidelines on bread weights, ingredients, and prices. If a baker shortchanged customers or added mystery fillers to the dough, they could be shamed, fined, or even thrown into the pillory. It was that serious. Bread was life, and cheating on bread was practically a moral crime. But here's your quirky fact of the night. People sometimes faked bread with ground-up bones, tree bark, or even clay. Especially in cities, where profit outweighed quality, bakers would sometimes blend cheap fillers into loaves to bulk them up. It didn't happen in every village, but if you were unlucky enough to live near a shady baker, enjoy your bark bread. It was the medieval version of cutting corners with high fructose corn syrup. And now let's open the door to our first scholarly debate. Some historians argue that medieval people had robust gut health because of their bread-heavy diet, while others think they just didn't live long enough to see the damage. It's a fair point. Life expectancy was shorter, so maybe those long-term effects didn't get a chance to show up. But even modern studies on ancient diets suggest that pre-industrial bread had serious probiotic potential, like gut health influencer on TikTok levels of potential. So here you are, halfway through your rustic breakfast, maybe dipping your bread into something warm, something brothy. You don't know about gluten intolerance, you don't fear bread, you don't bloat, cramp or crash after eating it. You just live. It fills your belly and fuels your day. You're not worried about macros or carbs or avoiding bad wheat. Your biggest worry is whether you'll have enough flour to last the week, or whether the miller is skimming off the top again. Later that day, you'll carry bread with you to the fields. Wrapped in a cloth or leather pouch, it'll be your only meal till nightfall, and it'll work. It'll keep you going, because this bread doesn't mess around. It's dense, it's nourishing, it's fermented, and it doesn't taste like sugar-coated cardboard. It's also probably baked in a communal oven that your whole village uses on rotation, but we'll get into that soon. For now, just know this. Medieval bread was alive. Modern bread? Not so much. And in the coming nights we're going to find out exactly why that is, and how you might just be able to bring some of that magic back into your own kitchen. But first, tomorrow, we need to walk out into the fields. That ancient grain didn't plant itself, and the stuff they were growing, it wasn't anything like what you're eating now. Out in the fields, the world looks golden. You're standing ankle deep in wheat, though not the wheat you're used to. This isn't some pristine, uniform crop planted with GPS precision. This is a bit wilder, taller, swaying in the breeze like it's whispering secrets to the sun. It's spelt, maybe emmer, or einkorn, some of the oldest grains known to humans. These ancient wheats haven't been tampered with by modern science. They're leaner, hardier, and yes, a little more stubborn when it comes to threshing, but they're also packed with nutrients and grown in soil that's still alive with microbes, not drowned in chemical fertilizers. You're probably working the land with nothing but a sickle and your own aching back. The harvest isn't just hard, it's sacred. The success of this crop means bread for the year. Fail, and your winter could go dark and hungry. You move carefully, rhythmically, the sun hot on your neck. It's dusty, sure. The chaff sticks to your skin. But you know what's at the end of this process. Flour, dough, and that dense, crackling crust. Motivation comes easy when it tastes this good. Now, ancient grains. Here's where it gets juicy. Modern wheat? It's been bred and crossbred and re-engineered until it barely resembles its ancestors. But spelt and emmer, these bad boys have stayed mostly the same for thousands of years. Their gluten structure is gentler, more digestible. Their nutritional profile is loaded with fibre, iron, zinc and protein. And yes, they grow slower and produce less yield than modern wheat, but the trade-off is in flavour and health. Basically, medieval grains were the difference between a nourishing meal and a bloated regret. You bend to examine the stalks. They're tall, way taller than modern varieties. Modern wheat was bred short so it wouldn't collapse under the weight of chemical fertilizers. But back here, before Monsanto and hybrid supergrains, wheat just grew, naturally. Sun, rain, soil, repeat. And the soil, it's dark, spongy, full of life. You'd be shocked to know it's a complex ecosystem, not just dirt. Medieval farmers didn't always know why their rotating crops helped, but they knew that it worked. They'd follow years of wheat with legumes or oats, letting the earth recover. No monocultures here, no spraying, just respect, patience, and maybe a little superstition for good measure. Quirky fact time. Some medieval fields were known as open fields, massive communal farms where villagers had individual strips to tend. Imagine your neighbourhood sharing a massive backyard garden, except the stakes are higher, and your share depends on showing up every day, sun up to sundown. There's something weirdly wholesome and deeply stressful about it all. You depend on your neighbours, and they depend on you. Someone slacks off. Everyone feels it at harvest time. Once the wheat is cut, it's bound into sheaves and left to dry. You can almost smell it, the faintly sweet, earthy scent of fresh-cut grain. It's a good smell, a hopeful smell. Later, it'll be threshed by hand, maybe with a flail, or trodden underfoot by livestock. Primitive? Sure. Effective? Absolutely. All that matters is getting the grain separated from the straw and chaff. Every kernel is precious. Now, here's the debate historians still chew over like stale crust. Were medieval peasants chronically undernourished, or did their diets actually provide everything they needed? Some say the grain-heavy diet lacked variety and left them vulnerable to vitamin deficiencies. Others argue that, with the inclusion of legumes, greens and small amounts of meat or fish, the average peasant ate far better than a modern junk food addict. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the messy breadcrumb-strewn middle. There were hungry years, sure, and not every village had the same access. But when the grain harvest was good, life felt rich. You watch as the harvested grain is loaded onto a creaky wooden cart. The oxen grunt and plod forward, the cartwheels carving twin ruts into the dry dirt path back toward the village. Soon, the grain will head to the mill, and trust me, we're going there too. But you pause a moment, brush dust from your tunic and feel the satisfaction that comes with honest work. You didn't just help harvest wheat, you helped make bread, and not just any bread. Bread that might keep your entire household alive this winter. Meanwhile, across the English Channel in other parts of Europe, different grains rule. In places where wheat is hard to grow, rye and barley take the stage. They're tougher, frost-resistant, and make darker, denser loaves. Not always pretty, but surprisingly rich in flavour and nutrients. And get this, the same fermentation techniques used for wheat were applied to these grains too. No yeast packets, no instant rise, just wild fermentation, slow and steady. So the next time you see a trendy bag of incorn flour at a specialty store, just remember, that's not innovation, that's resurrection. You're looking at a revival of something your ancestors relied on when times were tough. The soil was stubborn, and nobody had time for gluten sensitivity. Back in the field, the last of the golden stalks are bundled and stacked. Someone jokes about celebrating with ale, because of course they will. Grain isn't just for bread, it's also for beer. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find a medieval adult who didn't drink some form of grain-based brew daily. It was safer than water in many places, and honestly, it was filling. Like liquid bread. We'll circle back to that in a later section. Promise. As evening sets in, a soft orange glow washes over the landscape. Your muscles ache, your clothes are stiff with sweat and straw, but your heart feels full. You've harvested something real, something ancient, something the modern world forgot in its rush for convenience and profit margins. Tomorrow, we visit the mill, the ancient nerve centre where this golden bounty becomes flour, a place where the air tastes like powder and the floor creaks under centuries of footsteps, and where the type of grind could determine if your bread nourishes you or passes right through without much use at all. But for now, stretch out on a hay bale, close your eyes and listen to the wind in the wheat. This is what food used to feel like. The sound hits you before the building comes into view, a deep, rhythmic clatter, like stones kissing each other with every turn. You're approaching the village mill where the wheat you harvested yesterday is about to be transformed into flour. Not bleached, aerated, shelf-stable flour, but the real stuff. Coarse, warm, full of the bran and germ that most modern flour tosses aside like it's trash. This place is the heart of the community, and it smells like it. Earthy, nutty, with a trace of dust that clings to the inside of your nose the second you step through the door. The mill is built low and stout, its walls thick with centuries of use. Inside, a water wheel creaks as it turns, pulling energy from the river to power the great millstones. These aren't delicate machines. They're hulking discs of quarried rock that could crush bones if you got careless. They work slowly, but that's the point. That slowness keeps the flour cool. No overheating, no scorched nutrients. Just a steady grind that keeps the germ, bran, and endosperm intact. Think of it as the difference between a slow-roasted coffee and one flash-burned in a factory. It's not just about taste, it's about what survives the process. You watch as the grain gets funneled between the stones. It disappears for a moment, then spills out the sides in a soft golden shower. The air is thick with it now, flour clinging to your lashes and hair. This is living flour, rich in oils, enzymes, and most importantly, soul. If you were to scoop some up and bake with it right now, your bread would be dense, flavourful, and so nourishing it could carry you through a day's labour. Here's the deal. Stone ground flour is slow, but it keeps all the parts of the grain together. Modern flour? Not so much. When the roller mill came around in the 19th century, don't worry, we'll get there, it changed everything. It separated, the wheat into pieces, the white starchy endosperm for pure flour and the rest for, well, animal feed or industrial waste. The modern world called that progress. But standing here, watching the flour spill out warm from the stone, you start to wonder if maybe slow wasn't so bad after all. And here's your quirky historical twist for today. Millers were kind of medieval rock stars, not because they were beloved, oh no, quite the opposite. They were feared, resented, sometimes even hated, because they controlled the flour, and flour meant survival. A miller could easily take a toll, a handful of every sack, or more if no one was watching. Some were fair. Others? Let's just say their reputation was bad enough to inspire more than a few bawdy songs and satirical tales. Chaucer's Miller's Tale, yeah, not exactly a tribute. But corruption or not, the mill was where the magic happened. Scholars still argue about how vital these places were not just for food, but for social order. Some believe that access to a reliable mill helped define which villages grew wealthy, and which ones stayed scraping the bottom of the grain bin. Others argue it wasn't just about grain, it was about control. Whoever ran the mill could, in a sense, control the flow of life itself. You reach out and grab a small handful of the fresh flour. It's warm, slightly gritty, and when you rub it between your fingers, it clumps. That's the oil from the wheat germ, something your modern flour doesn't have because it would make the stuff spoil in a few weeks. And spoilage, in a profit-driven world, is bad. But back here, spoilage just means better eat it fresh. Which they did. Bread wasn't made to sit on a shelf. It was baked, eaten, and gone. Then the cycle started again. You look around and realise this mill is more than a machine. It's a rhythm keeper. Families come here on certain days, waiting their turn, sharing news and gossip while their sacks of grain get milled. Kids chase each other through the dust. Someone brings a hunk of cheese. The baker's apprentice is already measuring flour by hand, predicting how many loaves he can make by morning. And the miller, yes, that shady rock star, keeps the stones turning, always watching, always weighing. Another fun fact, depending on where you lived, you might not have had a choice in where you milled. Many villages were under feudal law, meaning the lord of the manor owned the mill, and you had to use his, even if it cost more, even if it meant walking miles. It was just part of the deal. You got land to farm, you got your flour toll. Was it fair? Rarely. But it kept the bread moving, and at the end of the day, that was the system. There's a kind of poetry to all of it, isn't there? The grain you harvested yesterday is now warm flour in your hands. Tomorrow it'll be dough, and after that, a loaf that cracks when you tear it, steams when you break it open. A loaf that can feed a family, or spark a riot, depending on who gets it and who doesn't. You pack your share of flour into a cloth sack and hoist it over your shoulder. It's heavy, but it's also life. You'll carry it home through the woods, past low stone walls and sleepy chickens, your steps syncing with the ancient rhythm of agrarian life. This flour isn't a commodity, it's a promise. A promise that if you keep grinding, baking, eating and sharing, the wheel will keep turning. And just like that, the wheel of the mill groans a little louder, as if it knows it's the unsung hero in this story. Tomorrow you'll meet the starter, the mysterious goo that gives bread its soul and breath. Because what good is flour without something to bring it to life? But for tonight, brush the flour from your tunic, rub the ache from your shoulders, and sleep easy knowing your loaf is just beginning its journey. Before dawn, while the rest of the village is still wrapped in dreams and damp wool blankets, you're already up standing beside a small earthen pot covered in cloth. You lift the corner carefully, and there it is, your starter. It bubbles softly in the dim light, like a creature breathing in its sleep. It smells tangy, a little funky, maybe even sour, but not in a bad way. In fact, it smells alive, because it is. This little jar of flour and water, left to sit on your windowsill, has captured wild yeast from the air. It's a tiny microbial miracle, an accidental science fair that medieval bakers didn't fully understand but used like magic anyway. This is how bread begins, not with a packet of instant yeast, but with time and trust and luck. It takes days to make a good starter. You feed it with fresh flour and water daily, watching as it transforms from lifeless paste into a living colony. Back in your world, they call this sourdough. Back here, it's just how bread is made. There is no quick rise, no timers or temperature-controlled proofing boxes. You have to feel it, smell it, watch the bubbles, and know when it's strong enough to raise dough. The science behind it is oddly beautiful. Wild yeast float around in the air, landing on everything, grain, fruit, your hands. When they find a mix of flour and water, they feast on the starches, releasing carbon dioxide and acids. That's the bubbly rise and the sour flavour. But it's not just yeast. Lactic acid bacteria are here too, playing backup. Together they create a symphony of fermentation, breaking down gluten, neutralising phytic acid, and making nutrients more bioavailable. It's not just a rise, it's a transformation. You scoop out a ladle of the starter, its surface gently frothing, and add it to a wooden bowl of flour, salt, and water. You mix it by hand. No silicone spatulas, no fancy mixers, just your fingers, the dough, and a little patience. It's sticky at first, resisting you, clinging like it's not ready to become bread yet. But slowly, as you knead and stretch, it starts to change. It tightens, smooths out, becomes elastic. This dough has life in it now. Real, tangible life. Now here's something funny. People in the medieval world didn't know why this worked. They didn't know about microbes or lactobacilli or yeast colonies. What they knew was that if they kept a little dough from the previous batch and added it to a new mix, something magical happened. The dough rose, it got lighter, tastier, it baked into loaves that didn't just sit in your gut like bricks. That leftover bit of dough was their starter, passed down from mother to daughter, baker to apprentice, sometimes lasting for generations. You weren't just making bread, you were inheriting a living culture, like a family heirloom with a hunger for flour. Quirky fact of the night. In some monasteries, bakers would bless the starter with prayers or holy water, believing its rising power came from God. And honestly, can you blame them? Watching something dead come alive and grow with nothing but time and air does feel divine. But the scholarly debate? Oh, it gets heated, pun fully intended. There's an ongoing argument about how sour medieval bread really was. Some historians suggest that bread was intensely tangy, borderline fermented thanks to long rises and robust starters. Others argue that bakers learned to tame the sourness over time, producing milder loaves that still had the benefits of fermentation without the face-puckering flavour. The truth? Probably somewhere in between. Each region had its own style based on climate, flour and starter health. Northern Europe? Probably more sour. Warmer regions? Maybe milder. Either way, it was bread with personality. Back to your dough. It's resting now, covered with a cloth, sitting near the hearth for warmth. It won't rise in 30 minutes. It might take the whole day or overnight. That's the thing about this kind of bread. It moves at its own pace, and in doing so, it teaches you patience. You check it now and then, gently pressing a finger into the surface to feel its progress. It breathes, it grows, it becomes, and as it rests, you do too. You step outside into the cold morning air, watching the chimney smoke from a dozen other homes curl into the sky. Somewhere other loaves are rising, other hands are shaping dough. In a strange way, everyone in the village is moving together, in sync with the slow rhythm of fermentation. It's like a shared heartbeat, subtle but strong. Later, when the dough has doubled in size, you turn it out onto a floured board. It's puffy, jiggly, full of air. You shape it carefully, pull, fold, tuck, trying not to deflate it. No pans here, no perfect moulds. You freeform it into a round or an oblong loaf, dust the top with flour and let it rest again. One final rise before the fire. In the corner of the room, a wooden peel leans against the wall. The oven is heating now, coals glowing, stone floor crackling with potential. Soon, the loaf will go in, and the real transformation will begin. But that's for tomorrow. For now, sit with the dough. Smell the sour tang, feel the flour on your hands. This is bread, in its purest form. A living thing, waiting to become something more. A superfood made from just flour, water, salt, and air. And when you eat it, your gut will thank you. Your whole body will thank you. Because this kind of bread doesn't just fill you, it heals you. Tomorrow we stoke the fire, open the oven, and watch the crust begin to crackle. The oven is already warm when you wake, and by warm, I mean it's practically a cave of fire. It's a black oven, No knobs, no timers, no safety instructions in multiple languages. Just stone, flame, and centuries of muscle memory. You add more wood to the fire early in the morning, feeding the heat like it's a living thing, because it is. The oven has to be just right, hot enough to crust the bread, but not so hot that it burns the outside before the inside even has a chance to breathe. There are no thermometers here. You test the heat by tossing in a bit of flour and watching how fast it browns. Or, if you're really bold, you stick your arm in quickly and count the seconds before you feel a sharp note from your skin. The flames are pulled out before baking begins. That's the trick with a black oven. You build the fire inside, let it heat the entire chamber, then rake the coals out. What's left is a hot, radiant cavern, heat sealed into thick stone walls that hold it like a secret. The floor crackles under your boots. It radiates a deep warmth that feels ancient, primal. This is bread's true crucible. Your loaf is ready. It's soft and risen, its skin taut with anticipation. You give it one last dusting of flour. Maybe score the top with a sharp blade if you're feeling fancy. Though, back here, it's more utility than artistry. The score helps steam escape, keeps the crust from splitting randomly. Then you slide the dough onto the baking stone using a wooden peel. One motion, swift and deliberate. No fumbling. You have one shot to land it right, or your loaf ends up with a charred bottom and a weird dent like your pride. The door is shut. There's no window to check on things. You wait, sitting nearby, your back against a cool wall, fingers dusted with flour and ash. The room smells incredible. Smoky and sour and sweet all at once. As the minutes pass, the loaf transforms. The heat causes it to spring upward. This is the oven spring. A burst of life as trapped gas expands and the crust begins to form. The outside hardens, cracks and darkens, while the inside turns from wet dough into an open, airy crumb. And here's where modern bread just can't compete. Radiant heat. The kind that surrounds the loaf completely, cooking it evenly from all sides. No dry forced air. No metal pans causing uneven browning, just stone and steam. This method gives the crust its signature snap and chew, the kind you feel, in your jaw and hear in your head when you bite in. You don't get that from a plastic bag of sliced fluff. Quirky fact for tonight. In many medieval villages, the communal oven was run like a shared utility. Not every home had its own, so families would take turns baking on assigned days. You'd mix your dough at home, then bring it to the oven wrapped in cloth or carried on a board. Everyone would mark their loaf, maybe with a bit of string or a slash pattern, so you didn't come home with someone else's bread. The oven keeper, often called the oven master, was basically the village's hot-headed pastry bouncer, in charge of fire, timing, and making sure nobody's crust got torched. If you think your HOA is strict, imagine getting fined because your dough leaked into someone else's space. And the debate tonight? Oh, it's delicious. Scholars still argue how much influence these communal baking practices had on social cohesion. Some say the oven was a gathering point where women and men gossiped, bartered, and shared tips. Others claim it was a source of conflict, bread fights, accusations of theft, rivalries over the perfect crust. Honestly, it was probably both. Bread is personal, and if someone burns your loaf or takes your slot, that's not just inconvenient, it's borderline betrayal. Back in the oven, the loaf is almost done. You don't use a timer. You just know. The smell changes. It deepens, thickens, becomes layered like a story reaching its final chapter. You crack open the door, letting out a wave of heat that nearly knocks you back. Inside, the crust is dark and blistered in spots. Not burned, just caramelized. You slide the loaf out and place it on a board. It sizzles slightly. You tap the bottom with your knuckle. It sounds hollow, like a tiny drum. That's how you know it's ready. And here it is. A loaf made with your hands, your time, your patience. The crust is rustic, a little jagged. The bottom bears the mark of the stone. You wait. This is important. Fresh from the oven, bread needs to sit. It's still baking inside, still finishing its rise. Cut too soon, and you'll ruin the crumb. So you sit nearby, eyes on your creation, listening to the faint crackle as the crust cools and contracts. You've probably noticed something by now. Every step of this process has required presence, attention, no shortcuts, no automation, Just your body, your senses, and your instincts. It's bread making as meditation. And the end result? It's not just food, it's nourishment, the kind your body actually recognizes. When it's finally time, you cut the loaf open. The knife resists at first, then gives way with a satisfying crunch. Inside, the crumb is irregular, open, slightly moist. It smells earthy and tangy, with hints of the fire that baked it. You tear off a piece, still warm, and take a bite. And wow, it hits different. The chew is real. The crust has bite. The flavour, deep, complex. You taste the wheat, the fermentation, even the stone it baked on. There's no sugar rush, no bloating, just satisfaction. Like your gut is giving you a thumbs up from the inside. This, you realise, is what bread is supposed to be. Not a filler, not an afterthought, not something you fear because of gluten or carbs or fake butter sprays. It's a meal, a medicine, a marvel of fire, grain and invisible life. Tomorrow we're taking this loaf to the table of a peasant, and maybe to the court of a king, to see how bread shaped medieval lives from top to bottom. Because whether you ruled a castle or ploughed a field, one thing was certain. You started and ended your day with bread. The loaf is still warm when you carry it through the village, cradled in a cloth like something sacred. Because in this world it is. Every household has its own rhythm, its own style of dough, but the one thing they all share is this. Bread comes first, before meat, before milk, even before vegetables. Bread is the anchor, and no matter your status, whether you dig trenches or polish goblets for a living, there's no escaping its grip on your daily life. You pass a group of children gnawing on crusts like chewy toys, their hands smudged with ash and dirt. A woman sits near a doorway, slicing her loaf with a small curved knife and handing thick pieces to her kids like it's treasure. Farther up the path, near the manor, the bread looks different. Lighter in colour, maybe sifted more finely, probably baked with wheat alone instead of a mix of grains. But it's still bread, still made from the same flour, the same water, the same starter, just cleaner, fancier, richer, in every sense of the word. Here's the fascinating part. In medieval society, bread wasn't just food, it was a class marker. The type of bread you ate told people who you were. The poorest peasants made what's called maslin bread, a dense, dark loaf baked with whatever grains were available. Rye, barley, oats, sometimes even acorns in bad years. It was coarse, heavy, filling, and surprisingly nutritious. You might not win any Instagram aesthetics points with it, but your digestive system. Oh, it's clapping in gratitude. On the flip side, the upper class enjoyed white bread, manchet as it was called. It was sifted repeatedly to remove all the bran and germ, leaving just the pale, starchy part of the wheat. Soft, fluffy, elegant, and essentially stripped of most of its nutrients. Funny how that works, right? The food that screamed luxury was actually nutritionally poorer, while the coarse peasant loaf was packed with fibre, B vitamins and minerals. But you know how it goes. If it looks cleaner and costs more, someone's going to call it better. Tonight's quirky fact. There was actually a bread hierarchy, seriously. In larger towns or castles, meals were often served with multiple types of bread, ranked by quality. Guests of honour got the fine white slices, the middle-tier folks got a rougher wheat, loaf, and the lowly servants, or even the dogs, got the trenchers. These were thick slabs of stale bread used as edible plates, soaking up stews and sauces. After the meal, they might be eaten, fed to the poor, or tossed to the animals. It was bread as dinnerware. Function meets famine. And yes, scholarly debate enters here like a judge at a bake-off. Some argue that white bread was genuinely healthier for the elite, because it was less likely to carry moulds or toxins, especially during times when poorly stored grain could grow deadly. Others point out that the nutritional value of whole grain bread far outweighed that risk, and that the elite's obsession with refinement actually robbed them of critical sustenance over time. What's the truth? Probably that both things were true at once. In times of plenty, white bread was a status flex. In times of famine, dark bread was survival. You take your loaf to a simple wooden table set near the centre of the village, where people are gathering for a shared meal. The bread is torn, not sliced, passed hand to hand. It's dipped into stews paired with goat cheese, smeared with lard or honey if someone's lucky. Everyone eats. No one's counting carbs. No one's reading ingredient labels. The loaf has no additives, no dough conditioners, no preservatives. You'll eat it today and tomorrow, and by the third day, if it starts to go a bit hard, you'll soak it in broth or milk and turn it into a pottage. Nothing is wasted. Not a crumb. And here's where you notice something that doesn't quite happen anymore. People trust bread. They don't fear it. They don't suspect it of making them bloated or tired or inflamed. Their bodies are used to it. Their guts know how to process it because it's fermented, full of roughage and digested slowly. This isn't a quick hit of glucose to spike your blood sugar and leave you jittery. This is slow fuel. It lasts. You think about your own modern experience with bread, the kind that comes in uniform slices wrapped in plastic, shelf-stable for weeks, soft enough to wed into a ball with 2 fingers. You've probably thrown away half a loaf before because it smelled weird after a month of sitting on your counter. This medieval bread wouldn't dare sit that long, not because it's fragile, but because it's real. It goes stale because it's made of food, and then you eat it anyway, because that's how it works. Around you, the meal continues. Someone tells a story about a fox stealing eggs. Kids laugh as they dunk crusts into the last of the soup, and you realise something bigger than bread is happening here. This shared loaf connects people. It's not just nutrition, it's culture, ritual, identity. You tear another piece off and chew slowly. It's sour, chewy, with a hard crust and a soft belly. You're full but not weighed down. The bread has done its job, quietly, completely. As the sun dips low and the fire dies out, you tuck the last bit of your loaf back into the cloth. There's enough for tomorrow's breakfast, maybe even lunch. And the heel, the hardest bit, that'll go into a stew pot or get toasted for crumbs. Every part has a purpose. You can almost hear your ancestors whispering, "Don't waste it." Tomorrow you'll walk into a different world, a cooler, wetter part of the continent where rye and barley rule the oven and sourness is more than flavour, it's survival. Because while wheat was king in some places, in others, it was rye that fed the people, and rye that held a few dark secrets of its own. But for tonight, rest easy with a belly full of honest bread and a mind full of questions. The first thing you notice as you walk into the colder northern edge of medieval Europe is the bread. It's darker, denser, heavier in the hand and the belly. It doesn't crackle like a wheat loaf. It thuds. But this isn't a bad thing. This is rye bread, the standard in regions where wheat is temperamental at best and impossible at worst. The air here is damp and chillier, with fewer sunny days and more fog that clings to your tunic like an uninvited cat. Perfect weather for rye, which laughs in the face of poor soil and short summers. You follow a family bringing their loaves to the communal oven. The dough is darker even before baking, almost muddy looking, with a scent that leans more tangy than sweet. Rye doesn't rise the way wheat does. It's got less gluten, so it doesn't hold air as easily. Instead, you get loaves that are more compact, almost brick-like, but weirdly satisfying. Each slice is dense enough to count as a meal and fibrous enough to keep your insides marching along in rhythm with your day. The process is familiar, but the ingredients shift slightly. Barley might get tossed into the mix, or oats. In some areas, it's a full-on mashup of whatever grains didn't die in the last frost. But rye is the queen here. It thrives where other grains give up. The dough takes longer to ferment, which adds to the sourness. And the loaves, oh, they last. A good rye loaf, once baked, could stay edible for over a week. No mould, no rot. Just a slow firming that turns it from soft and sour to firm and chewable. Then finally to a stage where you might soak it in beer or broth to soften it up again. This bread isn't trying to be fresh and fluffy. It's trying to survive. And so are you. Here's your quirky twist. In medieval Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, some of these rye loaves weren't just food, they were functional architecture. No joke. In a few regions, people would bake massive wheel-sized rounds of rye bread, dry them until they were hard as boards, and then hang them from the ceiling through holes in the centre. It kept them dry, out of the reach of rats, and easy to grab when you needed a meal. Imagine looking up in your kitchen and seeing your entire food supply hanging like wooden shields from the rafters. That's commitment. the bread. Might not be glamorous, but it's durable. And in a world of harsh winters and unreliable crops, durability is everything. You sit with a black rye loaf now, steaming and sour, and you chew. It takes time, your jaw gets involved. This isn't a loaf you tear through without noticing. Every bite is an event. It sticks with you, in the best way. You feel like a Viking might have powered a sea raid off this same recipe. And here's where the scholarly debate wanders in. Was rye bread safer or riskier than wheat? Because for all its benefits, rye has a dark side. Literally. Ergot. It's a fungus that sometimes infects rye crops during wet seasons, and if it makes it into your bread, the results can be nightmarish. Think hallucinations, convulsions, and gangrene-level blood vessel constriction. Some even say ergot poisoning was behind mysterious medieval plagues or bizarre dancing fits where entire towns lost their minds. Others suggest it played a role in Salem's witch hysteria centuries later. Scholars argue over how common these outbreaks were and how much they impacted history, but the danger was real enough to earn rye a reputation. The grain that feeds you, or curses you. Still, people kept eating it. Why? Because when rye didn't have ergot, it was dependable. You could grow it on the worst land, bake it into long-lasting loaves, and carry it with you across days of a labour or travel. It was fuel for peasants, monks, soldiers, anyone who needed to keep moving without stopping to cook. It became the default bread in huge swaths of Europe for centuries. You spend the day working with a farmer who eats rye bread morning, noon and night. He keeps a chunk of it in a leather pouch, wrapped in cloth, and pulls it out between tasks for a quick chew. He dips it in milk when he can. Beer if he's lucky. No spreads, no toppings. Just the bread, doing what it's meant to do. He's not thinking about gluten content or glycemic load. He's just trying to stay upright till sundown. There's something almost rebellious about this bread. It's not pretending to be elegant. It's not trying to please everyone. It's sour, stubborn, unapologetic. It tells your digestive system, brace yourself, and then delivers. And somehow it works. People raised on rye bread seem sturdy. Their guts are used to this fermentation bomb. Their microbiomes don't flinch. In contrast, you think about the bread aisles in modern grocery stores. Rows and rows of sliced air-puffed white loaves that seem designed to dissolve into sugar the second they hit your tongue. There's no fight, no fibre, nothing to grip your teeth into. It's like the bread equivalent of polite small talk. Meanwhile, this rye loaf? This is bread with opinions. Bread that's been through something. At night as the hearth dims, someone brings out the end of a loaf so dense it could double as a weapon. They slice it into coins and toast them over the coals. A pot of thin soup bubbles. Nearby, and the toasted bread becomes the meal. It smells nutty now, a little smoky. You bite in. The crunch gives way to chew, then warmth. This isn't food that wows on first bite. It's food that lingers. The kind that sticks to your ribs in the best possible way. Tomorrow we'll take a closer look at what happened when people didn't get their bread right. When things went wrong. Badly wrong. And how a loaf could mean the difference between good health and slow, creeping madness. But for tonight, let the last taste of sour rye settle in your mouth like a bedtime story told by a slightly bitter grandma. She means well, she just doesn't do fluff. You wake to murmurs, not your usual rooster crow. Something's off in the village. Whispers float through the damp morning air like smoke. A boy who can't stop shaking. An old woman with blackened fingertips. A farmer hallucinating that the river's on fire. You sit up, stomach turning, and catch the one word that everyone keeps circling around but won't say directly, bread. You rush to the oven keeper's hut where a small crowd has gathered. There's a loaf on the table, half-eaten, crust cracked but otherwise unremarkable. Yet it's blamed for everything. Because sometimes in the medieval world, bread doesn't just nourish, it turns on you. This is the darker side of the loaf, the one few talk about in quaint historical summaries. Because while bread was sacred, it could also be cursed, especially rye. And what you're witnessing? It's probably ergotism, the result of a fungus called Claviceps purpurea infecting the grain. You wouldn't notice it right away unless you were looking. It blends in as little dark growths on the rye kernels, easy to miss if you're poor, hungry and desperate for flour. But when baked into bread, ergot can wreak havoc on the human body. It constricts blood vessels, causes seizures, hallucinations, and in some cases rotting limbs. Folks called it St. Anthony's fire, because the pain burned from the inside out, and only a miracle or a long pilgrimage to a holy site seemed to cure it. You lean in and examine the loaf. It looks normal, but the weight of suspicion is thick. A child near you scratches furiously at his arms. Someone sobs quietly. You've seen bread as salvation. Now you're watching it as poison. Here's your quirky fact for the night. During the Middle Ages, outbreaks of ergotism were so severe that entire towns were affected. In 994 AD, more than 40,000 people in France reportedly died from contaminated grain. Monks from the Order of St. Anthony became known for treating sufferers, which is where the term St. Anthony's fire comes from. They'd feed patients clean wheat bread and care for their wounds, while everyone else slowly connected the dots. Something in the dark loaves was doing this. But this raises a complicated debate. How often did this really happen? Was ergotism a frequent threat in the average medieval village, or a rare but devastating event? Some scholars argue that isolated outbreaks were blamed for much more than they caused: witch trials, possessions, mass hysteria. Others think it was more widespread than records show, with villagers quietly suffering, unable to link cause and effect. After all, medieval science wasn't exactly peer-reviewed. A bad harvest, a wet year, and a lack of sifting tools — that was enough to let fungus into your daily bread without anyone realizing it until symptoms appeared. You watch as the village elders make the decision: burn the remaining loaves, cleanse the millstones, and pray. The baker insists he didn't know. The miller swears his grain was clean. But in a place where trust in bread runs deep, betrayal by the loaf hits harder than theft or gossip. It shakes the foundation. When your most sacred food turns against you, where does that leave you? You follow the others to the river, where loaves are tossed one by one into the current. Some float, waterlogging slowly. Others sink right away. You stand there watching the last of the infected bread vanish downstream, carried away like a secret too shameful to bury in soil. No one speaks. What can you say when your lifeline becomes your enemy? It's a reminder of how fragile the medieval food system really was. One bad harvest, one misstep at the mill, one damp sack of rye, and the whole community pays the price. You didn't have the luxury of choosing between 12 grain-free alternatives at your local store. If your bread failed you, your options were starvation, sickness, or superstition. Later that night, the baker makes a new starter from scratch, not because the old one was necessarily tainted, but because you don't take chances with bread. The sourness still clings to the air, but it's a different kind of sour now, doubtful, cautious. The community has to rebuild its trust, one rise at a time, and there's something powerful about that too. Bread isn't perfect. It never was. It carried risks, even as it carried you through lean times. But people didn't give up on it. They adjusted. They learned to recognize the signs. Some began sifting more carefully, even adding wheat when possible, despite the cost. Others switched to alternative grains altogether during particularly wet years. You help clean the mill that night, brushing out flour that clings to the cracks in the stone like regret. The miller grumbles, but he works faster than you've ever seen him. No one wants to be the source of the next outbreak. It's not just about flour anymore. It's about trust, reputation, the community's faith in its food supply. As the last light fades and the air grows cold, you sit near the hearth, nibbling cautiously at a piece of bread baked from a different batch. Wheat this time. It's lighter, but not immune. Still, it's better than going hungry. And that's the thing about medieval bread. It wasn't always pure, but it was always essential. Even when it betrayed you, you had to come back to it. Tomorrow, we'll look at how the very nature of the wheat itself began to change, long before modern pesticides, long before slicing machines and soft white loaves. Because not all wheat is created equal, and the shift from wild heritage grains to high-yield hybrids may have been the beginning of bread's long, slow unravelling. But tonight, let the last bite settle heavy in your stomach, and know this: not all poison comes in a bottle. Sometimes it's baked into the very thing you trusted most. It's a few days later, and you're back in the fields. Different fields this time. A new season, a new cycle, but something is shifting. The wheat you see here isn't the towering golden jungle you wandered through before. It's shorter, stiffer, oddly uniform. There's a sort of symmetry to the rows, like someone tried to train the crop into behaving. Welcome to the earliest signs of what we might call modern wheat. It's not quite the lab-bred variety you'll find in 21st century supermarket loaves, but this is where the change begins. Slow, subtle, and with consequences nobody can see yet. Back in the early medieval days, the wheat people grew was mostly landrace. Local, hardy, adapted to the soil and weather, and more genetically diverse than you'd ever guess. It was taller, rungier, full of character, and gluten that was less aggressive. Einkorn, emmer, and spelt were the usual suspects. These grains had roots stretching back thousands of years, and more importantly, they didn't give your gut the side-eye every time you ate a slice of toast. But wheat is a social climber. It wants to be everywhere. And over time, especially as farming scaled up to support growing towns and merchant economies, people began selectively planting only the best-yielding stalks. That makes sense, right? More yield, more bread. The problem is, when you start favouring only one trait, say dwarf height or fast maturation, you lose all the quirky little genetic variations that made the older grains resilient, nutritious, and let's be honest, digestible. And now you're watching that shift happen. The miller brags about how easy this new wheat is to thresh. The baker comments on how it produces a whiter crumb. The landowner grins about yields that could feed more tenants with fewer acres. Everyone's celebrating, except maybe your stomach, which quietly notes that this bread feels heavier. Not in weight, but in aftermath. Let's talk about the difference between ancient and modern wheat. Your quirky fact for the evening. Ancient grains like einkorn and emmer have 2 chromosome sets. Modern wheat? 6. It's like going from a paperback novel to a sprawling epic trilogy with footnotes, multiple timelines, and an unreliable narrator. That genetic complexity can be part of why some people tolerate ancient grains better. They have different kinds of gluten, softer, simpler proteins, and less of the aggressive, sticky stuff that causes trouble for so many today. And yes, gluten is at the centre of the scholarly debate tonight. You've probably heard it all. Gluten is evil, gluten is harmless unless you're celiac. Gluten didn't hurt medieval people, so what's your excuse? But here's where it gets messy. The gluten in modern wheat isn't the same as it used to be. Over time, selective breeding has ramped up the very proteins that make bread dough elastic and chewy. Great for industrial baking, not so great for human digestion, especially when that gluten hasn't been fermented long enough, as it was in traditional sourdough. But back here in the proto-industrial medieval world, people don't know what gluten is. They just know something feels different. The new bread is lighter, yes, easier to chew. It rises faster, bakes more predictably. But it doesn't sit as well. A few older villagers mutter about their guts turning sour or feeling blocked. The kids still eat it happily. The workers are too hungry to care, but the signs are there, soft as whispers. You kneel and run your fingers through the grain. It's dry, crisp, easy to break. There's an efficiency to it, and you can understand why a farmer would be drawn to this. More grain per acre means more money, more trade, more security. But you can't help but feel something is missing. The wildness, maybe. The chaos of the older varieties where each stalk looked slightly different from the next. Those grains demanded attention, adaptation, and patience. This one, it demands performance. And here's the other problem. Monoculture. As more farmers switch to a single type of wheat, the risk of disease and crop failure goes up. You lose the genetic diversity that protected fields from blight, rust, or drought. One bad season could take everything. You're creating a fragile system in exchange for a bigger payday. It's the agricultural version of living paycheck to paycheck, great until it's not. Later, as you help carry sacks of this new flour to the baker, you overhear the apprentices joking about how quickly the dough rises now. No need to wait all night, one says. Just an hour and she's puffed up like a noblewoman at a feast. They laugh, and it's meant with pride. But you know what's been lost in that speed. Flavour, complexity, digestibility. The longer fermentations of the older doughs allowed wild yeast to break down gluten, neutralise phytic acid, and unlock nutrients. Fast dough? It just inflates. It doesn't transform. The bread that comes out of the oven that night is gorgeous, round, golden, with an even crumb and a slightly sweet smell. It looks perfect. You slice in, take a bite, and it's good. Really good. But later, lying by the fire, your stomach churns in a way it didn't with the darker, rougher loaves. It's subtle, annoying, not devastating, but noticeable. Tomorrow you'll meet the roller mill, a mechanical marvel that will make today's flour look like a relic. It'll turn this new wheat into something even more refined, even more shelf-stable, even further from the living bread that carried your ancestors through the centuries. But that's still a few generations ahead. Tonight you're just a villager chewing your way through progress and wondering, quietly, what's being left behind in the name of perfection. You don't notice it at first. The bread still smells right, still rises in the oven, still gets that golden brown crust everyone watches like it's the village's firstborn. But something is off, a little too light, a little too smooth. You hold a slice up to the candlelight and it's practically glowing. The crumb's uniform, soft as clouds, barely any chew. It tears without resistance, and when you take a bite, there's none of that earthy tang or rustic resilience. It's almost sweet, but in a shallow, forgettable way, like the bread equivalent of elevator music. You're not in the medieval village anymore. Time's moved forward. We're inching into the early industrial era now. Think 18th century, brushing into the 19th. The fields are still full of wheat, but the way it gets to your plate is changing fast. And the biggest shift? The arrival of the roller mill. This is where the slow, stone-ground flour of the past starts to lose its grip. Because suddenly, someone invents a method to pulverize wheat with steel rollers, separating the components like a machine stripping an engine down to parts. Bran goes one way, germ goes another, and all that's left is the pure, white, fluffy endosperm, basically starch. That gets milled into superfine flour with none of the rough stuff your body's actually interested in. And here's the quirky fact for the night. This flour was so white, so refined, so pristine looking, that it quickly became a status symbol. People thought it was cleaner, safer, even healthier. Never mind that it lacked fibre, lost nearly all its micronutrients, and had a shelf life so long it could survive a minor apocalypse. This new white flour was like silk for your sandwich. Everyone wanted it. At first, only the wealthiest could afford it. But like most industrial innovations, the roller mill got faster, cheaper, and spread like wildfire. By the late 1800s, even average families were buying flour that looked nothing like what their grandparents knew. And the bread. It followed suit. Lighter, fluffier, and with a flavour profile that trended dangerously close to bland. You visit a newly built mill on the edge of town. It's a far cry from the creaky, flour-dusted stone mills you grew up around. This place roars. Machines hum, belts spin, and the air is almost sterile. Gone is the scent of toasted grain and sour fermentation. Everything here is sleek, mechanical, efficient. You watch as grain is poured into the feeder, crushed between rollers, sifted again, and packed into sacks faster than you can blink. It's impressive. Coldly impressive. But here's what no one notices yet. By removing the bran and germ, they've taken out the life of the flour. Bran holds the fibre. What keeps your digestion on track and your blood sugar from spiking? Germ? That's the embryo of the seed, full of oils, vitamins and nutrients. Without those, you're left with a carb bomb. White flour digests fast. Too fast. Flooding your system with glucose and leaving you hungry again an hour later. The bread fills your mouth but not your body. The scholarly debate? Oh, it gets philosophical here. Some historians argue that the roller mill was a technological marvel that helped reduce famine and fuel urban populations. Others claim it was the beginning of our nutritional downfall, the moment we traded vitality for vanity, flavour for fluff, and tradition for shelf life. The truth, as always, is layered like a good loaf. Yes, it fed more people, but what it fed them wasn't the same. In the town bakery, you try a loaf made from the new flour. It's oddly perfect. Round, symmetrical, even crumb. The crust is thin and pale, more like a membrane than a proper shell. You tear it open and steam wafts up, but there's no tang, no character, no soul. It's the bread equivalent of a polite handshake, and yet, people love it. It's easy to chew. It doesn't make crumbs. It's convenient, consistent. Children prefer it. Bakers can pump out 10 times more loaves in the same amount of time. The old sourdough starters are slowly pushed aside in favour of commercial yeast, which rises the dough faster, flattens the flavour, and removes any trace of fermentation's digestive benefits. And here's the kicker. No one realises they've just broken up with bread's entire past. The older loaves, the ones that took 2 days to ferment, that were baked in hot, smoky ovens, that change from village to village and season to season, those start to vanish. In their place, soft, white, standardised loaves that don't offend, don't impress, and don't feed your body the way bread once did. You sit on the stoop outside the bakery, nibbling at a piece. It doesn't offend your taste buds, but it doesn't satisfy either. You could eat half a loaf and still feel empty, and yet this is what progress looks like, at least for now. Tomorrow we dive deeper into this snowball effect. Because if you think fluffy white bread was the final transformation, think again. There's a whole industry coming. Chemical additives, preservatives, bleaching agents, and a marketing machine ready to convince you this loaf is everything your body needs. Spoiler alert, it's not. But tonight, rest your head on a pillow just as soft and just as empty as your bread. Sweet dreams. You're standing in a grocery store now. Bright, cold, full of beeping scanners and endless options. The bread aisle stretches, before you like some kind of labyrinth, lined with plastic bags that crinkle if you breathe too close. There are buns, loaves, baguettes, rolls. Some are whole grain. Others promise keto-friendly or zero net carbs. But the star of the show, the thing that moves in bulk and never seems to mould, is still white bread. Soft, squishy. So uniform it looks like it was extruded from a Play-Doh factory. You pick up a loaf and read the label. It's not flour, water, salt and yeast anymore. It's a list as long as your forearm, full of polysyllabic mysteries and things that sound more like engine parts than food. Welcome to modern bread. Or depending on how you feel about digestive health, welcome to your stomach's nemesis. This isn't the bread of your medieval ancestors. It doesn't crackle, doesn't sour, doesn't ferment. It's been engineered to rise quickly, bake evenly, stay soft for weeks, and survive shipping across the country. That would be impressive, if it wasn't also kind of horrifying. Because behind the pillowy softness lies a whole mess of problems, and it all starts with the wheat itself. You probably didn't notice when it happened, but the wheat in your bread today isn't the same stuff that grew in medieval fields. It's not even the same wheat your grandparents ate. Sometime in the 1950s and 60s, scientists began developing high-yield, semi-dwarf wheat strains. Shorter stalks meant more energy went into the grain, not the plant. The result? Bigger harvests, more food per acre, and, on paper, a miracle. This new wheat helped prevent famines in countries with rapidly growing populations. It was hailed as a triumph of agricultural science. But every miracle has a trade-off. And here's your quirky fact for tonight. This new wheat wasn't just more productive, it was also higher in a specific type of gluten that made it stretchier and stronger. That was great for industrial bread machines. Not so great for your intestines. Modern wheat has more alpha-gliadins, one of the gluten proteins most strongly linked to inflammation in sensitive individuals. But it's not just the gluten. These new wheat varieties were bred for yield, not nutrition. The minerals your great-great-grandma got from a slice of sourdough, cut by nearly half in today's standard loaf. Iron, zinc, magnesium. They've all been slowly disappearing from your daily bread. And then there's the wheat's beastie, glyphosate. You know, the active ingredient in most weed killers. In modern farming, wheat crops are often sprayed with glyphosate just before harvest to desiccate them. Basically, to dry them out uniformly for easier processing. It's efficient. It also means your flour might come with a side of chemical residue. Yum! Now don't panic. Regulations exist to limit exposure. But here's where the debate gets hot. Some studies link chronic glyphosate exposure to increased gut permeability, also known as leaky gut, which can lead to inflammation and food sensitivities. Other researchers argue the levels found in food are too low to cause harm. It's one of those modern dilemmas. The science is evolving, the companies are confident, and your body, well, it might just be trying to tell you something when you feel bloated, gassy, or wrecked after a sandwich. You take a closer look at that loaf in your hand. The ingredients include dough conditioners, like azodicarbonamide. Yes, the same chemical used in yoga mats. Emulsifiers to keep the crumb soft. Preservatives to extend shelf life. And high fructose corn syrup for that subtly sweet taste. It's bread, technically. But it's also an edible chemistry experiment. And here's what really sets it apart from the loaves you baked back in the medieval village. It's dead. Completely. There's no fermentation, no wild yeast, no bacteria, nothing alive, nothing beneficial. Just refined flour, additives, and a fast rise using commercial yeast. Your gut, which evolved to digest fermented, fibre-rich grains, sees this as an alien invader. There's no pre-digestion from lactic acid bacteria, no enzymes to break down anti-nutrients. It hits your bloodstream like a sugar bomb, with nothing to slow it down. So now we arrive at the debate that plays out on food blogs, in scientific journals, and across family dinner tables. Is it really the bread, or is it what we've done to it? Celiac disease is on the rise. Non-celiac gluten sensitivity is more common than ever. IBS, bloating, fatigue. Symptoms that once seemed rare are now practically dinner conversation. Some blame wheat, others blame processing, and some insist it's all in your head. But here's a theory. What if your body knows this isn't bread anymore? What if it's responding to the loss of fermentation, the stripped down flour, the chemical additives, the sprayed crops? Maybe it's not a gluten intolerance. It's a modern bread intolerance. You drop the loaf back on the shelf and walk out of the store. Outside, the smell of fresh bread drifts from a small local bakery. You follow your nose and find, behind a dusty window, a baker pulling loaves from a stone oven, round, crackling, blistered with dark crust. You ask if it's sourdough. She nods, points to a jar of starter that's older than she is. You buy a loaf, tear off a piece, and eat it right there on the sidewalk. It's tangy, chewy, alive. And just like that, something in your stomach says, thank you. Tomorrow, we're going deeper into that list on the back of the plastic bag. The additives, preservatives, conditioners, and sweeteners that turned bread from food into food-like object. Because understanding what's in your loaf might just help you figure out why your gut started ghosting bread in the first place. But tonight, let the crusty heel of real bread be your dessert. Eat slow, sleep deep. You're back in that fluorescent-lit grocery store staring at the same shelf of loaves. But now your eyes move differently. This time, you're reading every label like it's a confession, and each one a little more suspicious than the last. We've left the realm of flour, water, salt and yeast far behind. We're now deep in the world of ingredients you need a chemistry degree to pronounce. And no, this isn't an exaggeration. This is what happens when bread goes corporate. You grab a standard loaf, nothing fancy, just the usual classic white, or soft wheat. You flip it over. The first few ingredients look familiar. Enriched wheat flour, already suspicious. Water, sugar, yeast. But then come the others, a whole entourage of modern bread's entourage. Calcium propionate, mono and diglycerides, sodium stearoyl lactylate, azodicarbonamide, datum, ascorbic acid, soy lecithin, and a dash of something called natural flavour. What does that even mean? Who knows? The FDA isn't telling, and the food companies aren't volunteering. Let's break this down. One of the first culprits is calcium propionate, a preservative designed to stop mould from turning your sandwich into a biology project. It works, sometimes a little too well. Bread with this stuff can sit out for weeks without developing a single fuzzy spot. That's not natural, it's necromancy. Your medieval ancestors would be equal parts amazed and terrified. And while calcium propionate is generally considered safe, some research has linked it to behavioural changes in children when consumed in high doses. Others report headaches and stomach upset. Of course, no one's eating a high dose, unless they're eating this bread every day, which, let's face it, many people are. Then there's azodicarbonamide, a dough conditioner. You may have heard of this one from the scandalous headlines, "Subway uses yoga mat chemical in bread." Yeah, that guy. It's added to strengthen dough and make it more elastic. Ideal for high-speed factory lines where you can't afford a sagging loaf. In the US, it's still allowed. In Europe, banned. Same chemical, different response. Makes you wonder who's really watching out for your insides. How about datum, diacetyl tartaric acid ester of mono and diglycerides? It sounds like a joke someone made up during a late-night food science meeting, but it's a real thing. It acts as an emulsifier, making the crumb finer, softer, more uniform. Basically, it's there to make your bread look like it came out of a commercial. Smooth, bright, stable. Nothing unpredictable. Nothing wild. and while detem hasn't been conclusively linked to major health problems, it is made using fats that can include trans fats, depending on the source. And guess what? Those don't have to be listed if they fall below a certain threshold per serving. Convenient. Tonight's quirky fact. Many of these ingredients, like mono and diglycerides or sodium stearoyl lactylate, are actually considered processing aids, which means they don't always have to be disclosed on the label. That's right. Your bread could contain even more additives than you realise, and the manufacturer doesn't have to tell you, because apparently, if it's not considered nutritionally relevant, your body shouldn't worry about it. Tell that to your gut the next time it's playing the tuba after lunch. And then there's enrichment, a nice word for we stripped all the nutrients out, so now we're sprinkling a few back in. Remember, when white flour is processed through a roller mill, it loses the bran and the germ, aka all the good stuff. So flour manufacturers are legally required to add back iron and a few B vitamins like niacin and folic acid, which is like demolishing a house and tossing in a camping tent to make up for it. Technically, it's shelter. Functionally, it's a downgrade. The deeper problem is this. Every one of these additives was created to solve a problem industry created. Bread moulding too fast, add preservatives, dough rising too slowly, use chemical leaveners, loaf not fluffy enough, add emulsifiers, shelf life too short, add stabilizers, bread turning yellow in the bag, bleach the flour. It's a patchwork of fixes slapped onto a process that broke the moment we stopped letting bread take its time. Now, here's the scholarly debate bubbling underneath all this chemistry. Some food scientists argue that these additives are harmless in small quantities. They cite decades of research, FDA approvals, and the need to feed massive populations quickly and affordably. Others argue that the cumulative effect, eating these compounds every day in bread, in snacks, in fast food buns, in frozen meals, may be contributing to a slow, quiet wave of health problems. The gut doesn't lie, and lately the gut seems, well, pissed off. So you stare at this label, feeling like you're reading an overcomplicated science fiction script about how not to make bread. And then you think back to the dough you once mixed by hand in that dim medieval kitchen. Just flour, water, salt, and thyme. Maybe a starter you name like a pet. Nothing more. That loaf wasn't soft for 3 weeks. It didn't hold its shape like a plastic toy, but it fed you, fully. And if you think you can just buy the whole grain version and skip all this, check again. Many modern whole grain breads use the same additives. Some simply add brown colouring, molasses, or caramel to make them look more wholesome. It's bread in disguise, wearing a fibre moustache and hoping you won't notice. You put the loaf back and walk out again, breadless but newly aware. And if you're lucky, you pass by that small bakery again, the one with the slow rise, the starter jar, the baker with flour smudged on her cheek, and a crusty petard cooling on a wooden rack. That's the bread you trust. Not because it has fewer ingredients, but because it has only ingredients, and because it's honest. Tomorrow we meet modern gluten's not-so-little helper, glyphosate, and the role that spraying wheat fields has played in both agricultural convenience and digestive chaos. Because bread isn't just shaped in the oven anymore, it's shaped in the soil. But for tonight, rest your gut, and maybe dream about a loaf that goes stale after 2 days, because it's real. You step into the wheat fields of today, but they don't feel like fields anymore. Not in the romantic, sun-dappled medieval way. These are industrial stretches of land, neatly planted, heavily fertilised, and buzzing faintly with the energy of machines, not life. The soil beneath your boots is cracked and pale in some spots, overly damp and chemical-slicked in others. It smells sterile, clean in a way that's suspicious. You bend down, pluck a handful of the soil and roll it between your fingers. It doesn't cling the way it used to. It falls away too easily, powdery and tired. And here's the thing. The wheat looks perfect. Uniform height, golden heads, no signs of disease or weeds. A model crop, the kind that would have been a dream in the medieval world. But something's off, and you can feel it, even if you can't see it. At least not right away. This is where glyphosate enters the picture. It's the silent partner in the story of modern bread. An herbicide so widely used that it practically flows through the veins of industrial agriculture. It was originally developed as a powerful weed killer, targeting the shikimate pathway in plants, a process humans don't even have. That's why it was marketed as safe for people, harmless even. It only affects plants, they said. But here's your quirky fact for tonight. Wheat isn't even a genetically modified crop designed to resist glyphosate, yet it's sprayed with it anyway. Not to kill weeds, but to kill the wheat itself. The process is called desiccation. By spraying glyphosate shortly before harvest, farmers can ensure the crop dries evenly and quickly, making harvesting easier and more predictable. Think of it as forcibly pushing the plant to finish its life cycle, whether it's ready or not. So now, not only are we growing hyper-processed wheat, we're also harvesting it under a chemical death shroud. A little dramatic. Maybe. But it's hard not to wince when you realise that chemical residues are often present in the flour that eventually becomes your morning toast. Now, let's talk about the ongoing scholarly wrestling match over glyphosate. Some studies, and there are a lot, insist the levels of glyphosate in food are too low to cause harm in humans. Regulatory agencies stand by it, pointing to decades of research, risk assessments, and safety thresholds. But the cracks in that narrative are growing. Other researchers, more cautious or more critical depending on who you ask, have begun raising concerns. Not about immediate toxicity, but about the subtle chronic effects: endocrine disruption, gut, microbiome imbalances, inflammation, mitochondrial damage. One particularly hot topic is the way glyphosate may affect gut bacteria. Remember that shikimate pathway? Sure, humans don't have it, but bacteria do, and your gut is full of them. Some scientists now believe glyphosate may be disrupting your internal microbial universe by slowly suppressing beneficial bacteria while allowing harmful ones to thrive. That can mean bloating, food sensitivities, mood changes, even immune dysfunction. And since bread is still a daily staple for so many people, the exposure is consistent, relentless even. It starts to make sense, doesn't it? Why bread feels different now. Why you can eat a sandwich and feel sluggish, foggy, or inflamed. It's not just the flour, it's not just the gluten, it's the wheat's whole journey, from seed to spray to stomach. You talk to a farmer standing near a row of combines and he's honest. Glyphosate makes things easier, more efficient. Less risk of a ruined crop if rain threatens at the wrong time, but he admits he doesn't eat the bread made from this wheat. My wife bakes our loaves with organic flour, he shrugs, as if that explains everything. And it kind of does. This brings us to the real twist. Even the people growing this wheat aren't always eating it, not in its final, processed form, and that should give you pause. Because if something is safe, but no one close to it trusts it enough to put it on their table, what does that say? So where does this leave you? Probably in the same position as millions of people who feel like they've suddenly become sensitive to bread. Maybe you used to eat it without issue. Now one sandwich and you're puffed up like a balloon. It's easy to blame gluten, and yes, for some, that's part of it. But for many, it's not gluten at all. It's what's hitching a ride on the gluten. The glyphosate residues, the added emulsifiers, the preservatives, the fast-rise yeasts, the lack of fermentation. It's not that bread turned on you. It's that the very thing we called bread was quietly swapped out for a chemically propped-up imposter. You walk out of the field with dust clinging to your boots, not the rich, crumbly soil of ancient farmlands, but the chalky kind that doesn't hold nutrients or water very well anymore. Fields like these need constant input just to stay productive. More spray, more fertilizer, more management. They're like a body running on caffeine and adrenaline, barely holding it together. Tomorrow we'll come back to the gut, the place where all this modern bread ends up, and take a hard look at what happens when food designed for shelf life meets a digestive system designed for slow fermentation and whole foods. We'll trace the rise of leaky gut, autoimmune conditions, and the quiet war between your microbiome and your pantry. But tonight, shake the dust off your shoes, pour yourself some tea, and let the idea settle. The bread you eat today started dying long before it reached your plate. You sit at your kitchen table, a slice of supermarket bread on a plate in front of you. You take a bite, not because you want to, but because you're curious. You chew. It's soft, flavourless, and practically dissolves before you swallow, and then you wait. 10 minutes later, your stomach feels heavy. Not pain exactly, just pressure. 20 minutes in, there's a strange fog settling behind your eyes, like your body's quietly protesting. You try to ignore it, But your gut doesn't care about politeness. It's sending up flares now. Welcome to the leaky gut generation. It's a term that gets tossed around a lot. On blogs, in wellness podcasts, often accompanied by vague promises to heal your microbiome with this one weird trick. But under all the clickbait and chaos, there's a real, growing body of concern. Not everyone agrees on the terminology, but more and more researchers are acknowledging what your gut has probably been trying to tell you for years. Something's gone wrong, and modern bread might be playing a bigger role than anyone wants to admit. Let's start with the basics. Your digestive tract isn't just a food tube, it's a fortress. Its lining is made of cells packed tightly together, connected by what are literally called tight junctions. These act like security guards, deciding what gets into your bloodstream and what gets shown the exit. But under certain conditions, chronic inflammation, stress, poor diet, environmental toxins, those tight junctions start to loosen. Microscopic gaps open. Stuff that should have been digested fully and flushed out starts slipping through into places it shouldn't be. Immune cells sound the alarm. Inflammation flares. And over time, this low-grade immune battle can snowball into fatigue, food sensitivities, skin issues, mood swings, even full-blown autoimmune diseases. And guess what likes to show up to this party? Industrial bread. Here's your quirky fact of the night. Zonulin, a protein discovered by researchers studying celiac disease, regulates these tight junctions. And guess what stimulates zonulin release in the gut? Gliadin, one of the main proteins in gluten. Now, not everyone reacts the same way, but for some people, even without celiac disease, gliadin triggers increased zonulin levels, loosening those junctions and inviting inflammation to come in and make itself at home. Now, to be clear, not all bread is the enemy. The sourdough loaf you baked in a medieval kitchen, that bread had gluten too, but it also had time. Time for fermentation to break down problematic proteins. Time for lactic acid bacteria to balance the gut and reduce phytic acid, a natural compound that blocks mineral absorption. In slow bread, gluten gets pre-digested. In fast bread, gluten crashes into your system like a wrecking ball. Modern wheat, high in aggressive gliadins, grown with glyphosate, milled into ultrafine flour and rushed into a loaf with commercial yeast. That's a perfect recipe for gut chaos. And when you eat it daily, sometimes multiple times a day, you're not giving your body a chance to recover. You're just stoking the fire. The debate among scientists? It's heating up. Some say leaky gut is an oversimplified concept, used too often without rigorous data. Others point to emerging research linking increased intestinal permeability to everything from rheumatoid arthritis to type 1 diabetes. They're studying how food additives, like emulsifiers and preservatives, may disrupt the gut lining, how stress affects gut barrier integrity, and how poor diet starves your microbiome of the fibers it needs to thrive. And in the middle of it all sits bread. Cheap, convenient, ever-present bread. You think back to that loaf in your kitchen. It's been sitting there for 10 days. Still soft, still springy, still not mouldy. That alone should concern you. Real bread, made with living ingredients and no preservatives, starts to go stale after 48 hours. Mould creeps in by day 4 or 5. The fact that this loaf seems immortal isn't a miracle, it's a warning. It's not aging because it's not really alive. You imagine what your gut bacteria must be doing as this bread arrives. The good microbes, fed by fibre, fermented foods, and natural prebiotics, are likely staring in confusion. There's nothing for them here, no nourishment, no challenge, just refined starch, broken down too quickly, absorbed too fast, feeding the wrong kinds of microbes instead. That imbalance, called dysbiosis, can lead to all kinds of problems: gas, bloating, inflammation, even brain fog. You might not connect those symptoms to the toast you ate this morning, or the roll at dinner, but your gut does, loudly. So what can you do? That's the thing. Once you know, you can't not know. You start looking for better bread. You remember the old ways: wild yeast, long fermentation, whole grains, fewer ingredients. You realise that bread doesn't have to hurt. It never used to. Bread was medicine, ritual, celebration. What we call bread now is a processed food product masquerading as a staple. And if your body is pushing back against it, it's not because your body is broken, It's because the bread is. You start asking questions. Where did this flour come from? Was it sprayed before harvest? What kind of wheat is it? How was the dough fermented, if at all? Is this loaf built to nourish me, or just to survive shipping and shelf rotation? It's not about being perfect. It's about waking up. Realizing that bread was never supposed to make you feel bloated, sleepy, irritable, or inflamed. It was supposed to carry you through the hardest days, give you strength, and bring people together around a fire, a table, a common loaf. Tomorrow, we return to the fermentation jar, to the bubbling starter, and the people quietly reclaiming what bread was, always meant to be. Because while industrial bread is still everywhere, there's a growing movement that says not for me, and it all starts with flour, water, and time. But tonight, listen to your gut, literally. It's been talking this whole time. You just weren't sure bread was the one whispering. The first time you try feeding a sourdough starter, it feels like adopting a pet that lives on your counter and farts a lot. You mix equal parts flour and water in a jar, give it a stir, cover it loosely and wait. That's it. You come back the next day to find nothing. Just beige sludge. But then, by day 2 or 3, tiny bubbles appear. It smells weird. Sharp. Yeasty. Maybe a little like sweaty fruit. You panic, assume it's gone bad, but no, this is normal. This is the smell of wild microbes waking up. You feed it again. Stir. Wait. And now you're part of something ancient. Something quiet and revolutionary. Fermentation. Because somewhere along the path of shelf-stable bread and food science miracles, we forgot that bread is supposed to be alive. Not figuratively, literally. The yeast in your starter? It's not some powdered, vacuum-sealed cousin from the grocery store. It's wild, pulled straight from the air, your hands, the flour itself. It's like opening a microscopic portal into your environment. This is the kind of yeast that medieval bakers cultivated, fed, and passed on like family heirlooms. It's also the kind your gut recognizes. More friend than foe, more healer than hazard. And here's your quirky fact tonight. There are over 1,500 known species of yeast, and your sourdough starter usually has a mix of several, not just Saccharomyces cerevisiae, the standard baking yeast, but Candida milleri, Kazakhstania exigua, and a whole constellation of others. They coexist with lactic acid bacteria, creating that signature tang and digesting components in the dough that your body struggles with on its own, like gluten and phytic acid. It's not just a flavour enhancer, it's a molecular reprogrammer. You start baking bread with this starter, flour, water, salt and thyme. That's it. No preservatives, no additives, just patience and trust. You mix your dough and let it sit. And here's the key. The fermentation doesn't happen in 20 minutes. It takes hours, sometimes overnight. But that's the point. During that time, the wild microbes go to work, breaking down starches, lowering the pH, pre-digesting gluten, and making minerals like magnesium and zinc easier to absorb. In other words, they do what your gut struggles to do alone. They prepare the food for you. Contrast that with modern bread, rushed through with commercial yeast and baked in under an hour. No time for breakdown, no time for complexity. It's like fast-forwarding a song to the chorus without hearing the verses. It gets the job done, but it's missing the soul. Now let's dip into the current debate. Does fermentation really make gluten easier to digest? Study after study says yes, though the degree varies. Some research shows that long fermentation can reduce gluten content by up to 90%. Not enough for someone with full-blown celiac disease, but potentially life-changing for those with non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Other studies highlight fermentation's ability to reduce FODMAPs, short-chain carbs that often cause bloating in IBS sufferers. Basically, when you let bread take its time, it becomes easier to love and easier to live with. So why isn't everyone doing this? Because fermentation is slow, and modern life is not. You can't automate wild fermentation on a mass scale. Starters are moody. They need feeding, warmth, and the occasional pep talk. Commercial yeast is fast, predictable, obedient. That's what industrial bakeries want. Not a bubbling jar that might decide to nap on cold days and overperform in a heat wave. But here's the quiet rebellion happening in kitchens across the world. People are saying no to factory bread. They're dusting off old mixing bowls, ordering bags of heritage flour, and naming their starters like pets. Yours is called Captain Crumbbeard, obviously. They're learning how to stretch and fold dough instead of kneading it. They're discovering what a real crust sounds like when you tap it, the hollow drumbeat of something handmade. You bake your first sourdough loaf. It's not pretty, the shape is lopsided, the scoring is weird. But when you slice it open, steam curls out and fills the room with a smell you forgot bread could make. You take a bite. The crust is crisp and blistered. The crumb is chewy, tangy, complex. It tastes like something real, something earned. And the best part? No bloating. No weird crash an hour later. Your body takes it in like an old friend coming home after years away. You start to notice other things. Your sleep improves. Your digestion calms. That persistent brain fog begins to lift. Is it the bread? Not entirely, but it's part of it. Because food isn't just calories, it's information. And for the first time in years, you're feeding your body something it actually understands. Your friends start asking questions. Is that really just flour and water? Don't you have to knead it forever? What if I kill the starter? You smile. You've asked all those questions too, but now you know better. Bread doesn't need perfection. It needs presence, attention, a willingness to work with life instead of sterilizing it out. The world hasn't caught up yet. Most stores are still stocked with plastic-wrapped loaves that last longer than a bad relationship. But in homes and bakeries, a revival is happening. Not loud, not viral, just real, crumb by crumb. Tomorrow we'll visit those who are taking the next step, planting ancient grains, saving old seeds, and resisting the monoculture that turned wheat into a commodity. Because it's not just about baking bread, it's about growing the kind of wheat that remembers who you are. But tonight, tuck your starter in, cover the bowl, and listen to the quiet bubbling in the kitchen. That's not just fermentation, that's history breathing again. Morning breaks over a stretch of land that looks different. Not because of what's growing, but how. The wheat here isn't short and uniform like in industrial fields. It's tall, really tall, some stalks brushing your waist, others up near your chest. There's a kind of wildness to it, a freedom. The grains don't line up in rigid rows. They sway in the wind like they remember what it feels like to belong to the earth, not to a spreadsheet. This is a heritage grain farm, and this is where the quiet resistance begins. You walk among varieties you've never heard of. Einkorn, spelt, emmer, khorasan, red fife. Each has different feel, a different shape. Einkorn has delicate heads, almost fragile. Spelt is lanky, a bit awkward. Khorasan is golden and rich, with an ancient glow. These aren't modern wheats. They weren't bred in labs for yield or for ease of harvest. They were selected by time, geography, and survival. And now they're being brought back, seed by seed, by farmers who've had enough of chemical dependency, gut-wrecking gluten, and tasteless bread. You meet one of these farmers. He's sunburned, soft-spoken, wearing a shirt that's definitely older than his tractor. He gestures to the waving field with something close to reverence. This grain hasn't been messed with in over 1,000 years, he says. It grows slower, sure, but it's honest. Honest grain. That's something you haven't heard before, but you feel it. These grains demand more from the soil and from the people growing them. They don't thrive on synthetic nitrogen or monoculture conditions. They want rotation, real dirt, compost, rain, wind. And what they give back? Flavour, nutrition, bread that doesn't fight you. Here's your quirky fact for the day. Some heritage grains, like emmer and einkorn, contain significantly less gluten than modern wheat, and the gluten they do have is structurally different. Softer, more elastic, less inflammatory. There's even early research suggesting that some people with gluten sensitivities, not full-blown celiac but the uncomfortable middle ground, can tolerate breads made from these ancient grains, especially when fermented slowly. They might not rise as high or slice as neatly, but what they lack in puff, they make up for in peace. The farmer shows you his seed vault. Nothing high-tech, just rows of labelled jars carefully stored. Each one holds history. These aren't just seeds, they're lifelines. Genetic diversity, once nearly lost, now being carefully brought back. And not just by him. Across the world, small farms, co-ops, and backyard rebels are doing the same. Swapping seeds, trading stories, learning how to grow like it's 1620 again. It's not nostalgia, it's necessity. Because here's the thing. The more we rely on a narrow band of wheat varieties, the ones that work best with industrial machinery, respond to chemical inputs, and bake predictably in commercial ovens, the more vulnerable our food system becomes. Climate change, soil degradation, crop disease, they all hit harder when you've put all your grain in one basket. Literally. Heritage grains offer resilience. Each one thrives in different conditions. Some love drought, some laugh at frost. Some tolerate poor soil, others flourish with only compost and rain. There's a scholarly debate raging quietly in agricultural circles. Is it realistic to scale heritage grain farming? Can it feed the world? Detractors argue that yields are too low, that it's a boutique solution for the privileged. But supporters counter that we don't need to feed more, we need to feed better, that the goal shouldn't be more wheat per acre, but more nutrition per loaf. When bread nourishes, you eat less. When your gut is healed, your health improves. And when your food comes from living soil, your whole body knows it. You help with the harvest. It's slower than the big combines you've seen. This is hands-on work. You thresh some by hand, beat the stalks against a wooden frame, sift the grain from the chaff. Dust flies. Your arms ache. But you notice something else. This grain smells alive. Nutty, grassy, a little wild. You imagine grinding it, mixing it with water, watching it rise on your counter. Bread from this flour wouldn't just be better. It would be a return to something you didn't even know you were missing. The farmer hands you a loaf baked from red Fife, a heritage wheat nearly lost to time before being rescued from a seed bank. You tear it open. The crumb isn't perfectly uniform. It's got big, wild holes, signs of slow fermentation and good bacteria. The crust is darker than you're used to, almost blistered, and the flavour, rich, deep, a little sweet, a little sour. You chew and chew and chew. And with every bite, your body nods in approval. This kind of bread doesn't need a label that screams artisan or ancient grain, with stylized fonts. It knows what it is, and when you eat it, you know what it is. It's not trying to be trendy, it's just trying to be real. You ask the farmer why more people don't grow this stuff. He shrugs. Because it's harder, but that's kind of the point. Harder, but better. Slower, but worth it. You leave with a small sack of flour he grinds fresh each week, a jar of starter from his wife's kitchen, and a mind full of seeds, both literal and metaphorical. You know you'll never look at a slice of bread the same way again. Tomorrow we meet the lazy geniuses of the modern kitchen, the no-knead revolutionaries, the backyard bakers bringing real bread back into ordinary life without fancy tools or degrees. Because while heritage grain farming might be a heavy lift, baking, with love and time, that's something anyone can do, even you. But tonight, place your flour on the shelf like a treasure, and sleep knowing that not everything good has been lost. It's a lazy Sunday morning, you're barefoot in the kitchen, still in pyjamas, with a half-finished cup of coffee and a bowl of shaggy wet dough staring back at you from the counter, like a pet you forgot you owned. Welcome to the no-knead revolution, a quiet, cosy uprising that's helping real bread sneak back into the lives of people who barely have time to floss. No degrees in baking, no ancient wood-fired ovens, no $300 Dutch ovens required, though, let's be honest, you kind of want one now. Just flour, water, salt, yeast, or, better yet, a bubbly sourdough starter, and time. Mostly time. This dough has been sitting for hours, untouched. You mixed it last night with a spoon and a prayer. No kneading, no sweating, no complicated techniques. Just covered it with a cloth and let nature handle the rest. And now it's doubled in size. It jiggles slightly when you poke it. It smells faintly sour, warm and yeasty. In other words, it's alive. This movement started quietly. Home bakers who were tired of dense bricks and terrified of the word hydration percentage found a recipe online. Something so simple it seemed almost fake. Mix everything. Let it sit. Shape it. Bake it. And suddenly, they were making loaves that looked like they came out of an expensive bakery window. Crackling crust, open crumb, that golden blistered top that says, "I've arrived. Please put butter on me." The truth is, this method isn't new. It's just the rediscovery of something ancient. Medieval bakers weren't kneading dough with stainless steel stand mixers. They were letting time and fermentation do the heavy lifting. The gluten develops slowly when you let the dough rest. Water activates the enzymes. The microbes break down the starches. Your job? Mostly not getting in the way. Here's your quirky fact tonight. During the pandemic, yes, that pandemic, sourdough starter became a global obsession. People named them, fed them, tracked their bubbles like proud parents. Crumb shots trended on social media. For a moment, the entire internet smelled faintly of toasted flour. But beneath the memes and the mess, something important happened. People remembered what bread could be, and that maybe, just maybe, they didn't need plastic-wrapped perfection shipped from a warehouse 3 states away. They could make it themselves. You turn the dough onto a floured surface. It spreads like a lazy cat. You do a few stretch and folds, gently pulling one side up, folding it over, turning the dough, doing it again. You don't even know if you're doing it right, and that's fine. It's forgiving. You tuck it into a shape that vaguely resembles a ball and let it rest again. Covered, undisturbed. This is the heart of no-knead bread. Patience over perfection. You don't rush. This, you trust it. The scholarly debate tonight. Whether this method is cheating or not. Purist bakers scoff at the simplicity, arguing that real bread demands elbow grease and years of apprenticeship. But others say that's exactly the kind of gatekeeping that pushed bread into the hands of corporations in the first place. When baking became too intimidating, people stopped doing it. And when they stopped baking, they stopped asking questions. The mystery was lost. The magic was forgotten. And into that vacuum stepped a loaf with 30 ingredients and the soul of a tax form. But the no-knead movement isn't just about bread. It's about access. It's about re-establishing a connection between food and the people who eat it. It's about reminding you that the thing you've been buying for convenience might be the very thing making you tired, bloated, and disconnected from your own kitchen. When you bake bread at home, even if it's ugly, even if it's flat, even if you accidentally burn the bottom, it's yours. You know exactly what's in it. You understand how it got here. You watched it grow. You felt it come alive. You preheat the oven. Maybe you do have that cast iron pot after all. Thank you. Impulse internet shopping. But if not, you make do. A baking tray, a covered pan, a clay pot you forgot you owned. You score the loaf with a knife, awkwardly but with heart, and slide it into the heat. 40 minutes later, the smell hits you. That deep, primal, slightly caramelized aroma of real bread baking. It seeps into the walls, into your clothes, into your mood. You open the oven door, and there it is. A crusty, golden loaf that crackles when you lift it. You tap the bottom, hollow, perfect. You let it cool, though every cell in your body wants to cut into it immediately. But no, you've waited this long. What's 10 more minutes? Finally you slice in. The crust sings. The crumb is imperfect, but open and airy enough to feel like a minor miracle. You smear a bit of butter on a warm slice and take a bite. It's slightly sour, earthy, chewy, with a crust that resists just enough before giving way. And more than anything, it's satisfying. Not in the sugary, fast-carb way, but in the deep cellular sense that says, you did this. Your body takes it in gratefully. There's no crash, no bloat, no mystery ingredients, just bread. Real bread. You look at the clock. The whole process took less than 5 minutes of hands-on work. The rest? Just waiting. That's the secret no one tells you. Good food doesn't have to be hard, it just has to be left alone long enough to become itself. Tomorrow we go back even further, to the science now proving what Grandma always knew, that the old ways work for a reason. That sourdough isn't just delicious, it's medicine. That maybe your gut isn't broken, maybe your bread is. But tonight, fall asleep with flour on your hands, a loaf cooling on the rack, and the comforting knowledge that revolution can be as simple as a bowl, a spoon, and a little patience. There's a quiet thrill in realizing your grandmother might have known more about gut health than half the internet. No degrees, no research papers, just generations of observation passed down through flour-covered hands. She didn't talk about the microbiome or gut flora. She just said things like, don't rush the bread, or let it sit overnight, it's better that way. And now, thanks to modern science catching up with ancient wisdom, we're learning she was exactly right. You're sitting at a small wooden table, a slice of homemade sourdough in one hand and your phone in the other, scrolling through research like it's a menu. And what you're seeing is wild. Study after study confirming that long-fermented bread, especially sourdough, isn't just easier to digest. It actively supports your health, like on a cellular level. This isn't folklore anymore. This is peer-reviewed, lab-tested, bacteria-measured truth. Let's start with gluten, the villain of modern bread stories. You know the drill. Gluten's the protein that gives bread its stretch, but it also gets blamed for a host of digestive issues, from bloating and fatigue to full-blown autoimmune attacks. But here's the twist. When you ferment bread the old way, like your ancestors did for literally thousands of years, something magical happens. Lactic acid bacteria and wild yeasts break down the gluten into smaller, less reactive peptides. The long tangled protein chains that modern guts struggle with, snipped into manageable, non-inflammatory pieces. It's not just digestion, it's detox. Here's your quirky fact for tonight. Sourdough fermentation can reduce gluten content by up to 97% in some breads. That's not just impressive, that's practically therapy. Again, it won't make bread safe for those with celiac disease, but for the ever-growing group of people labelled gluten-sensitive, it could be a game-changer. Turns out, the problem might not be you. It might be the impatient bread you've been eating. And gluten isn't the only thing getting the microbial makeover. Phytic acid, also known as an anti-nutrient, is a naturally occurring compound in grains and seeds that binds to minerals like iron, calcium and zinc, making them harder for your body to absorb. But fermentation, it breaks that down too. The bacteria eat it up, neutralize it, and leave the minerals bioavailable. That slice of sourdough isn't just filler, it's delivering the nutrients your cells have been quietly begging for. This is where the scientific debate gets interesting. There's still a lot of disagreement about the role bread plays in inflammation, particularly with autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, and even skin conditions like eczema and psoriasis. Some researchers argue that wheat, regardless of how it's processed, can exacerbate these conditions. Others are now looking at the difference between types of bread. The fermentation time, the grain variety, the baking method. Turns out not all loaves are created equal, and treating them like they are might be the nutritional equivalent of blaming all vegetables because someone once choked on a raw Brussels sprout. You start noticing little things. After switching to long-fermented sourdough, your energy feels steadier. You're not crashing mid-morning. Your digestion's smoother. That bloating? Gone. There's no food coma after lunch. And maybe most surprising, you feel satisfied. Like, full. But not in the heavy, regret-soaked way that comes from scarfing down 2 slices of supermarket toast slathered in peanut butter. This is different. Lasting. Balanced. You talk to a friend about it, and they raise an eyebrow. It's still bread though, right? I thought carbs were the enemy. And there it is. The big myth. The one that got baked into the wellness industry sometime in the late 90s and has refused to die since. Carbs, bad. Bread, carbs, therefore, bread, bad. But what if we've been tossing the wrong loaves out with the bathwater? Bread, in its original form, was never the enemy. It was slow, fermented, full of whole grains and good bugs and roughage. It was designed by human culture to be digestible. What we've done in the last century is mutate it beyond recognition, bleach it, sweeten it, and then blame our bodies when they protest. It's like setting a car on fire and then yelling at it for not driving. You dig deeper and find scientists now exploring how sourdough affects blood sugar. And again, the results are surprising. When compared to regular white bread made with commercial yeast, sourdough causes a lower and slower spike in glucose. Why? The fermentation process changes the structure of the starches, creating what's called resistant starch, the kind that doesn't digest immediately, and instead feeds your gut bacteria. That's right. The bread feeds you slower, and feeds your microbes at the same time. Win-win. You think back to your old loaf, the one that came in a plastic sleeve and lasted 2 weeks on your counter. That bread was fast-burning, high glycemic, little to no fibre, a guaranteed ticket to the blood sugar roller coaster. No wonder you were hungry again an hour later. And now, here you are, cutting into a slice that took 24 hours to come together. It's got weight, texture, purpose. You toast it lightly, Top it with butter and a fried egg. It crunches, but not in the brittle way. The crust gives a little, then snaps. The crumb is warm, tender, tangy. It fills you up in the best way. Not just your stomach, but something deeper, something ancestral. You chew and think, this is what bread is supposed to be. Tomorrow we head into the fields again, but this time into a battleground. Because while sourdough and ancient grains are making a quiet comeback, Big Ag isn't going down without a fight. We'll meet the seed banks preserving wheat's forgotten children, and the corporations trying to lock the future of grain inside patented walls. But tonight, sleep like someone who's finally made peace with a loaf. Your gut isn't mad anymore. Your body isn't confused. You've reintroduced it to an old friend and it remembered everything. You step through the gate into what looks like a garden, but isn't. There are no neat rows, no signs marking hybrid varieties or colour-coded planting schedules. It's messy, overgrown in that way that says nature's doing the planning now. But look closer. This isn't neglect. It's preservation. You're standing in a seed bank, a living one. Not the vault sealed under permafrost in Norway or behind biometric locks in Switzerland, but a farm-sized library of forgotten grains, and each stalk, each ear of wheat swaying in the breeze, a time capsule, a quiet act of defiance. The caretaker meets you at the edge. She's wiry, weathered, with sun-browned arms and the calm focus of someone who spends more time talking to soil than screens. She leads you through clusters of ancient grains, murmuring names like incantations: Blue Tinge Ethiopian, Rouge de Bordeaux, Sonora White, Turkey Red. Some sound like they belong in fantasy novels. Others, straight off a pioneer's ledger. But all of them share one thing. They were almost lost. She plucks a few kernels and hands them to you. The grains are different shapes, some long and narrow, others fat and round. This is what wheat used to be before it was refined, reduced and copyrighted. These seeds weren't bred for machines. They were chosen over centuries for taste, resilience and nourishment. Each one adapted to its land like language to its people, shaped by weather, soil and survival. Here's your quirky fact for the night. Seed saving used to be standard practice. Families passed grain down like heirlooms. Farmers selected the best performing plants from each harvest to grow next year's crop. It was deeply personal, a relationship. Now, in many countries, saving patented seed is illegal. Farmers are often required to buy new seed every year from corporations that own the rights to the genetics. These aren't just business contracts, they're control mechanisms. And that's where the fight begins. The modern wheat you find in most fields today, it's the result of decades of selective breeding, not just for yield, but for mechanical compatibility. It has to fit the combine, survive transport, and bake reliably in mass production bakeries. Flavour, nutrition, digestibility. Those fell off the list somewhere around the 1950s, and the result is that most of the world's bread starts from a shockingly narrow genetic base. The caretaker leads you to a patch of einkorn. It looks scrappy, ancient. She says it's one of the oldest cultivated grains, dating back 10,000 years. Not the kind of wheat you can toss into a commercial thresher, but rich in carotenoids, lower in gluten, and shockingly high in flavour. She tells you it almost vanished completely. Industrial agriculture had no use for it. Until recently, when a few bakers and farmers started whispering its name again. Now, slowly, carefully, it's coming back. But not without resistance. Big ag companies don't like unpredictability. They like control, standardization, patentable genetics. They want wheat that behaves, that plays by the rules. And wild old grains, they don't. There's a scholarly debate raging just beneath the surface of this field. Who gets to own the future of food? Is grain a global resource, part of humanity's shared heritage, or is it just another product? Many argue that patented seeds restrict biodiversity and push small farmers into debt cycles. Others claim that intellectual property rights incentivize innovation and help feed a growing population. The truth is, seed politics are messy. And while you're busy deciding between whole wheat and sourdough, these companies are deciding which kinds of wheat you're allowed to choose from in the first place. You pick up a few kernels from the ground and hold them in your palm. It's hard not to think about how fragile it all is. How the bread that once sustained entire civilizations has now become a commodity, its roots trimmed for convenience. And how much depends on people like this caretaker, quietly planting and saving, and hoping someone will care enough to continue. You ask her how she keeps these varieties alive. She smiles. I bake with them. I share them. I talk about them. That's how you keep anything alive. So you take a bag of seed with you. Rouge de Bordeaux, an old French variety with deep flavour and soft gluten. It's not a miracle grain. It won't fix everything, but it's a start. A reminder that you don't have to settle for what's on the store shelf. That the history of bread doesn't belong to corporations. It belongs to everyone. And maybe that's the real revolution. Not just baking your own bread, but choosing where it begins. Choosing wheat that was never sprayed, never patented, never stripped of its nutrients in the name of yield. Wheat that remembers how to nourish. Tomorrow we'll leave the fields and head to a quieter place, a monastery kitchen, where bread wasn't just food, but devotion. Because for centuries monks were the keepers of the loaf, baking not for profit or status, but for the soul. But tonight, place those seeds somewhere safe, and know that what you're holding isn't just grain, it's possibility. The monastery is older than memory. It rises from the hills like something carved out of time itself, stone walls weathered smooth by centuries of wind and prayer. You step through the arched entrance and feel the hush settle over you. Not silence exactly, but a kind of deep stillness. The kind that makes you walk softer, breathe slower. Somewhere inside these walls, monks are baking bread. Not to sell, not to package, just to feed. Themselves, each other, and the quiet rhythm of a life lived deliberately. The kitchen is warm and dim, lit by narrow windows and the orange glow of a hearth that never seems to go out. A wooden table runs the length of the room, dusted with flour and surrounded by bowls, crocks and baskets of herbs. The air smells like fermentation, sour and earthy, edged with rosemary and thyme. A monk stands at the far end, sleeves rolled, hands deep in a bowl of dough. He doesn't look up when you enter. He just says, "You're in time for the second rise," like you've been expected all along. You join him without speaking, watching his hands move with calm purpose. He's working with a soft, sticky dough that smells faintly sweet. Spelt, maybe, or Emma. It's not flashy. There's no sourdough starter with a pet name, no digital scale, no cast iron pans, just flour, water, salt, and thyme. The ingredients are written on the wall in Latin, faded but still legible. Bread here is more than food, it's a practice. Here's your quirky fact for the night. Monastic orders in medieval Europe were some of the earliest keepers of agricultural knowledge, including bread. Monks didn't just pray, they cultivated grains, developed baking techniques, and created some of the first written records of bread making. In fact, some of the oldest sourdough starters still in use today are kept alive in abbeys, fed daily by hands that have passed down their care for centuries. Imagine a loaf rising from the same microbial lineage that fed pilgrims in the 1300s. You don't get that from the grocery aisle. The monk finishes shaping the loaves and covers them with cloth. He gestures for you to sit. On the windowsill, a bowl of wild herbs steep in water, part of a brewing project maybe, or a tea meant to aid digestion. He explains gently that bread here isn't made in haste. It rises 3 times. Once after mixing, again after shaping, and a final rest before baking. Each rise, he says, reminds us to pause, to transform, to wait. And you begin to see it, how bread, in this context, mirrors the soul. The ingredients are humble, even common, but through process and patience they become something transcendent. It's not about the crust, or the crumb, or whether the scoring opened perfectly. It's about what the loaf represents. Labour, waiting, surrender, gratitude. You ask if the monks use commercial yeast. He smiles without answering. Instead, he walks to a shelf and lifts a small earthenware jar. Inside, a thick, bubbly starter gurgles softly. It smells strong, alive, ancient. They've been feeding it longer than you've been alive. Probably longer than your country has existed, and somehow this silent colony of yeast and bacteria has outlasted war, famine, plague, and every passing trend in baking. Now the scholarly debate: were monastic loaves healthier because of their ingredients, or because of the lifestyle surrounding them? Scholars still argue this point. Yes, monks used heritage grains, fermented their dough, and baked fresh. But they also ate less overall, lived by routines that included fasting, physical labour, and long hours of sleep. Was it the bread, or the context that made it healing? Likely both. Bread wasn't an afterthought here, it was sacred. Prayers were said while mixing, gratitude given before eating, loaves shared, not hoarded, and that kind of reverence changes things. You help load the risen loaves into the oven. It's a deep, wood-fired hearth, the kind that holds heat like memory. The monk uses a long peel to slide the loaves into place, whispering a blessing you don't quite catch. Not for show, just habit. He doesn't check a timer. He doesn't need to. When you live like this, you develop a sense of things, of time, of temperature, of readiness. While the loaves bake, he offers you a slice of yesterday's bread. It's dense and dark, with flecks of herbs and grains you don't recognise. It smells like earth, and stone and sun. You chew slowly. The crust bites back, but the inside is tender, sour and slightly sweet. You don't ask what flour they used. It doesn't matter. What matters is how it makes you feel, grounded, present, like something inside you, stretched thin by the modern world, is finally settling back into place. You help clean the table. The smell of fresh bread begins to swell through the room. You catch sight of other monks moving quietly through the halls, following the scent. Meals here are simple. Often bread, cheese, a bit of garden greens, sometimes soup, but no one complains. Because the bread does something food rarely does anymore. It nourishes beyond the body. You leave with a loaf tucked under your arm, still warm, the crust crackling gently as it cools. And as you walk through the stone arch and back into the world of traffic and to-do lists and notifications, you find yourself walking slower, breathing deeper, like some part of you remembers how to wait. Tomorrow will come full circle, back to your own kitchen, to that loaf on your counter. We'll talk about what lives in the crumb, and how you can read it like a story, one filled with air, microbes, movement and time. Because even in the tiniest holes, bread holds meaning. But tonight let that monastery loaf rest beside your bed like a good book. You've earned the kind of peace that rises slowly. Back in your own kitchen, the monastery still lingers in your senses. The quiet shuffle of robes on stone, the earthy smell of rising dough, the way time felt thicker, almost warm. But now you're standing in front of your own loaf, freshly baked, resting on a wooden rack with that same quiet crackle you've come to love. You're not in a monastery, but there's still something sacred here. Something small and handmade and alive. You slice in, and what you're looking at now is what bakers call the crumb. That's the inside of the bread, the texture, the pattern, the holes. And it turns out there's a lot more going on in that crumb than just aesthetics. It's not just about whether it looks Instagram-worthy. The crumb is a fingerprint, a map, a record of how your dough lived its short but glorious life. This particular loaf? Not perfect. The holes are a little uneven. There's a bigger pocket toward the top, and a few denser spots down by the crust. But the texture is springy, elastic, with just the right chew. You bring a slice up to your nose. It smells faintly of yogurt, toasted nuts, and something floral you can't quite name. And when you taste it, it hits you again. Bread isn't just food. It's fermentation captured in time. Here's your quirky fact for the night. Those irregular holes you see in a rustic sourdough loaf, that's carbon dioxide. Literally the breath of the wild yeast and bacteria that fermented your dough. Every pocket of air is a tiny fossil of microbial life, and depending on how you mixed, how long you let it rest, how you shaped it, and even how humid your kitchen was, you get different patterns every time. Your loaf is unique, not just in flavour, but in architecture. You start to notice how crumb structure correlates with feel. Loaves with tight uniform crumb tend to come from quick-rise breads with commercial yeast. Fast fermentation, limited complexity, a very controlled, almost sterile experience, but the more open the crumb, the more dramatic the holes, the more variation, the more wild the fermentation. That's the product of long rises, high hydration, and the unpredictable joy of sourdough. It's a chaos you can eat. And this is where the scholarly debate comes in. Is a super open crumb actually better? Some purists argue that the bigger the holes, the better the loaf, proof of fermentation mastery, but others push back. After all, you can't exactly spread jam on a slice full of gaping air pockets without it falling through. And nutritionally, a tight, dense rye bread, slow fermented and whole grain, might beat an airy white sourdough any day in terms of gut health and satiety. So the ideal crumb depends on what you're after, performance art or performance nutrition. You try slicing another loaf you made with freshly milled whole wheat. The crumb is tighter, more moist. It smells richer, more earthy. The flavour is deeper too, almost nutty, with a bitterness that balances the tang. And even though it's not as flashy as your other bake, it feels more substantial, like something your ancestors would have eaten before a day of hard work, or a long walk to the next village, or a vigil through the night. And here's what's funny. After all the drama of gluten-free trends, keto diets and anti-carb manifestos, scientists are now returning to this kind of bread and saying, wait, this might actually be really good for us. Not just because of the fibre or the vitamins, but because of what's not in it. No added sugars, no preservatives, no dough conditioners or emulsifiers, just flour, water, salt, and fermentation. It's clean, but not in the trendy detox way. Clean in the literal elemental sense. You pause with your slice in hand, looking at the crumb again, and realise, this bread tells a story. Your story. You remember how long it took to rise, whether it was warm or cold that day, if you forgot a fold, if the oven preheated right. It's all there, in the holes, in the texture, in the crust. Bread is a mirror, and once you start reading the crumb, you stop worrying so much about perfection. You start looking for truth instead. You spread a little butter on a warm piece, maybe drizzle some honey and take another bite. The flavours hit in layers. First the crunch of crust, then the soft chew of the crumb, then the tang and sweetness mingling at the edges. It's satisfying in a way nothing from a plastic bag ever was. You're not full yet, but you're not hungry either. You're content. And something else happens too. You slow down. You eat more mindfully. Because when you've waited 24 hours for a loaf, you're not going to shovel it down like a drive-through sandwich. You savour it. You respect it. Maybe you even share it. Half a loaf for a neighbour, a slice for a friend. Because bread, when made with time, naturally leads to generosity. Tomorrow we'll step back even further and look at what bread meant not just to individuals, but to entire communities. We'll explore the ancient traditions of baking as ritual, celebration, even resistance. Because when you follow the crumb far enough, it leads you straight into culture, memory and identity. But tonight, wrap your loaf in a clean cloth and place it somewhere safe. Not because it needs protection, but because it deserves it. The fire's already burning when you arrive, glowing low and steady beneath the big communal oven. It's ancient, thick stone, soot-darkened walls, a chimney that's probably seen more history than most cities. You're in a village now, not a specific one, not even a specific time, just a village, the kind that has existed in some form for centuries, anywhere humans and grain have crossed paths. And here, baking bread is not just a kitchen task, it's the heartbeat of the community. You're handed a peel, long and smooth with use, and a round of dough wrapped in cloth. Everyone here has brought their own loaf, shaped at home, proofed overnight, and carried down to the communal oven like a sacred offering. The loaves vary wildly, some simple and flat, others domed and braided, some adorned with seeds, others plain. Each one holds the story of a household, a recipe passed down, or a new experiment still unsure of itself. This, you realise, is what bread used to mean. Not just calories, not just food. Bread was connection, ritual, mutual reliance. You couldn't bake alone, not just because the oven was shared, but because the knowledge was. You learned from neighbours, parents, older siblings. You knew who had the best starter, who grew the tastiest rye, who always burned the crust just a little and called it extra flavour. It wasn't about competition, it was about continuity. Here's your quirky fact tonight. In some European villages, the communal oven was so important that families had their own wooden bread stamps, symbols or initials they pressed into the tops of their dough before baking so they could identify their loaves once everything came out golden and hot. It was like a bakery brand, but handmade, personal, and passed down through generations. Your initials didn't just mark the bread. They told everyone, this is ours, this is us. The loaves go in one by one, the oven crackling gently as the flames kiss the stone. There's laughter, a little gossip, someone telling a story while others arrange baskets of herbs and cheese on a nearby table. You feel it in your chest. Bread wasn't just about feeding yourself. It was about feeding the village, a reliable, daily miracle that you had to work for together. Then the war came. No, not one specific war. Any war. Famine, colonization, industrialization, global trade. Wheat became political. Control the grain, control the people. The ovens fell silent, the stamps were forgotten, and bread, once sacred, became cheap. Fast. Predictable. It moved from hands to machines, from homes to factories, from something you knew to something you bought. And slowly the soul of the loaf started to vanish. But here's where the story shifts. Because right now, somewhere in the world, people are rebuilding those old ways. You've seen it already. In the seed savers, the no-knead rebels, the monastery kitchens. But there's more. Tiny bakeries run by artisans who've rejected factory flour. Urban gardens planting corn in forgotten lots. Co-ops hosting sourdough classes in basements, lit by a single flickering bulb. Online forums filled with people swapping starter-like trading cards. These are the modern bread warriors. Quiet, flour-dusted, deeply committed. You talk to one of them in a small-town bakery where the loaves sell out before noon. She used to work in finance, she tells you, but after one too many days of eating at her desk, she snapped. Not dramatically, just quietly walked out one day and never went back. Now she mills her own flour, ferments everything slowly, and refuses to stock plastic-wrapped anything. Her customers bring in their own bread bags, sometimes their own flours. One old man brings apples from his tree every week, which she bakes into a seasonal loaf she calls retirement toast. She tells you something that sticks with you. Bread is the softest kind of resistance. You ask what she means. She says, it's personal, but it's also political. When you bake your own loaf, you're stepping out of the system that wants everything fast, cheap, and empty. You're saying, I choose time, I choose nourishment, I choose flavour. That's rebellion now. There's a scholarly conversation happening too, less about flour and yeast, and more about sovereignty. Food scholars and activists talk about food justice, seed sovereignty, and culinary decolonization. At first these sound like buzzwords, but they're not. They're real movements built around the idea that bread shouldn't be a product of corporate policy, that wheat shouldn't be patented, that baking can be a form of reclaiming identity, especially for cultures whose traditional grains and recipes were stolen, suppressed, or erased. You leave the bakery with a warm loaf wrapped in a cloth napkin printed with lavender sprigs. It's almost too pretty to eat. Almost. But when you tear it open, the smell hits you hard. It's not just sourdough tang or crusty richness. It's memory. It's community. It's every village oven and stamped loaf and kitchen whisper that got you here. So you start thinking, what would it look like to bring this into your life? Not just baking your own bread, but baking for others. Sharing loaves with neighbours, teaching a friend to feed a starter, hosting a weekly bread swap. These aren't just nice ideas. They're practical, powerful ways to rebuild something we lost without even noticing it was gone. Tomorrow we'll dive back into your own kitchen one last time. The journey's nearly over, but there's still one question to answer. How do you make sure bread becomes part of your life again? Not just once, but for good. But tonight, let that village oven warmth follow you into bed. You're not baking alone anymore. You never were. You're back at home, staring at your pantry like it holds some kind of secret. And maybe it does. There's flour now, not just the usual white all-purpose bag, but new ones. Bags with names like red fife, spelt, einkorn, whole rye. You've started making room. And on the counter sits your starter, quietly bubbling like a low conversation between centuries. You've come a long way from that first awkward loaf. And now comes the real challenge. Not baking once, not baking well, but weaving bread into the rhythm of your life. Gently, permanently, like the softest thread in a bigger tapestry. You've probably noticed something already. Real bread isn't convenient. It doesn't ask for 5 minutes of your time and a press of a button. It doesn't fit neatly between meetings or run on your schedule. It has its own schedule. It ferments overnight when you're sleeping. It doubles slowly while you work or rest. It teaches you to plan ahead and brace yourself. It sometimes makes you wait. But weirdly, this has made you better, more patient, more deliberate, maybe even more present. You've stopped checking your phone as much when you're mixing dough. You listen more while shaping. You even sit down to eat rather than chewing on the run. And you've noticed a new kind of mindfulness creeping into other parts of your life. How you shop, how you rest, how you feed yourself. Bread didn't just heal your gut, it's healing your attention span. Now, let's talk ingredients. Because by this point you've probably realised that bread isn't just flour, water, salt and starter. It's what kind of flour, how clean your water, and what source of salt. Maybe you've already found yourself deep in a late-night Google spiral, comparing mineral profiles of different salts, or watching someone on YouTube mill their own flour like they're reenacting Little House on the Prairie. And hey, you're not alone. Here's your quirky fact of the night. The trace minerals in unrefined sea salt can subtly alter the flavour and fermentation of your bread. That's why some bakers swear by certain salt brands the way coffee nerds obsess over single-origin beans. Even water, yes, water, can change how your dough behaves. Too much chlorine? It might inhibit fermentation. Too soft? It can throw off your hydration ratio. In short, everything matters. But here's the good news. It doesn't have to become a science project. You can nerd out if you want to, and you probably will, but at its heart, good bread is forgiving. You can make it with tap water. You can make it with store-brand flour. What matters more is the intention, the rhythm, the return to a process that used to be as normal as boiling an egg. There's a debate among modern bakers now. How much should we automate? With digital proofers, hydration calculators, and app-controlled ovens, you can bake with absolute precision, like a lab tech in an apron. But some argue that this strips bread of its magic. That part of the joy is learning by feel, by failure, by the way a dough sags on a humid day or springs back in winter. It's not anti-tech, it's pro-touch. Knowing when dough is ready without needing a number to tell you. That's not just skill, that's intimacy. And as you continue baking, you realise something else. People notice. Friends start dropping hints. Oh wow, this is amazing, I wish I could do this, while staring just a little too long at your crusty boulé. Family members send you photos of their half-burned attempts, asking for advice. Neighbours you barely knew now wave and say, "Hey, still making that bread?" And before you know it, you're part of a slow, crusty movement. A bread-scented ripple spreading through your life in the quietest, kindest way. You start giving loaves away. First because you made too much. Then because it feels good. You wrap them in dish towels or brown paper. Maybe tie them with twine if you're feeling dramatic. And every time you hand one off, you see that look. The surprise, the warmth, the deep, almost ancestral recognition that someone made this for me. Bread isn't flashy. It's not chocolate or cake or wine. But it goes deeper. It says, I took time. I planned. Ahead. I wanted to feed you. And maybe that's what's been missing from our food culture all along. Not just nutrients, not even taste, but care, attention. The kind of nourishment that happens when someone shapes dough with their own hands and says, without saying it, you matter. Tomorrow, we'll return to where this all began, your own gut. We'll explore how science is finally catching up to tradition, confirming that what makes bread feel good often lines up with what makes it be good. And maybe, just maybe, we'll look at how your body was never broken. It was just waiting for better bread. But tonight, cover your dough, tuck your starter in, and know that you've done something real. You've made space in a rushed world for something slow, living, and utterly ordinary. And somehow, that's extraordinary. So here we are, full circle, back to the body. Yours. The one that groaned under the weight of bloating and brain fog. The one that begged for energy without the crash. For fullness without the fog. The body you maybe thought was fragile, overly sensitive, just not good at digesting bread. But now, after months of flour under your nails and slow rises and loaves that speak in scent and steam, you're starting to wonder, what if it was never me? What if it was the bread all along? You sit at your kitchen table, feet up, half a slice of homemade sourdough left on your plate. No bloat, no regret, no desperate need for a nap. Just the quiet hum of satisfaction in your belly, like your body is nodding in agreement for once instead of yelling in confusion. And while it might feel like magic, the truth is way more fascinating. It's biology. Real, measurable, delicious science. You've probably heard about the microbiome by now. It's the gut equivalent of a rainforest, a dense, complex ecosystem of bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms living inside you, helping digest food, produce vitamins, regulate your immune system, and even influence your mood. Yeah, your gut talks to your brain. And when it's happy, you're happy. When it's inflamed, well, you already know that story. Here's your quirky fact for tonight. The gut is often called your second brain because it contains over 100 million neurons. That's more than in your spinal cord. It's wired for sensing, reacting, and yes, feeling. Ever had a gut instinct? That's not just poetic language. That's your enteric nervous system doing its thing. And what feeds this brain belly system? Fibre, fermented foods, resistant starches, real nutrients. In other words, real bread. The kind made from whole, unrefined flour. The kind fermented over hours, even days, by a thriving colony of wild yeasts and lactobacilli. Not the ultra-processed, sugar-loaded, preservative-packed kind that sits on supermarket shelves for 2 weeks looking suspiciously ageless. Your gut knows the difference. Even if your mouth doesn't, your microbes do. Scientists are catching up. Recent studies show that sourdough bread, particularly the kind made from ancient or whole grains, can actually support the gut microbiome by delivering prebiotics, basically food for your good bacteria, and by reducing compounds that normally irritate the intestinal lining. Gluten that's been fermented? Easier to digest. Phytic acid that binds minerals? Broken down. Even blood sugar response tends to be better, slower, more stable. That's not diet culture hype. That's metabolic function doing a little happy dance. And here's the wild part. All of this was happening long before we understood any of it. Long before people knew the word microbiome, they were already doing the right thing, soaking grains, fermenting dough, milling whole wheat fresh, baking loaves with crust that crackled and crumbs that carried life. They didn't need lab results. They had generations of observation, instinct, and the simple logic of feeling better after eating food that respected the process. Of course, not everyone reacts the same way. Some people genuinely can't tolerate gluten. Some digestive systems are more fragile than others. There's still a lot to learn about individual responses, about the role of wheat varieties, baking times, and even hydration levels. The scholarly debate continues. Is it the wheat, the yeast, fermentation, or something else entirely? But one thing's becoming clear. This isn't about carbs being bad. It's about the difference between bread and bread-like products. You start to look back at how many years you spent blaming your body for not handling bread well. How much guilt or confusion or self-doubt you carried around like invisible weight. And now, it feels lighter. Not because your problems were imaginary, but because they were misplaced. You weren't broken. You were just out of sync with what your body actually needed. And it's not just digestion. You start noticing shifts in other places too. Your skin clears up a little, your sleep gets deeper, your mood evens out. Is that all from bread? Probably not. But good bread, real bread, sets off a chain reaction. When your gut feels better, you eat better. When you eat better, your energy improves. And when you have more energy, you start showing up to your life with a little more presence, a little more patience, and maybe, if you're lucky, a little more crust on your fingers. You think about people still stuck in that old loop, eating lifeless, mass-produced bread, and wondering why they feel tired, foggy, inflamed. You want to hand them a warm loaf, still singing from the oven, and say, try this. Not as a diet, not as a fix, just as a beginning. Because that's what real bread does. It begins things. Conversations, communities, healing, ritual, rest. A return to something older, quieter, and deeply human. Tomorrow we reach the end. One last chapter, one last loaf, one last reflection. But before we go, there, let yourself lie down tonight with that strange new feeling that maybe your body isn't your enemy. Maybe it's just been waiting for you to feed it something worth trusting. Morning again, the kind that arrives softly, not in a rush. You wake up to the faint scent of flour still lingering in the air, maybe a little dust on the counter from last night's bake, and the quiet satisfaction of a life that, somehow, feels more rooted than it used to. You stretch, shuffle into the kitchen, and there it is. One last loaf, cooling on the rack, golden and cracked, still whispering heat into the space around it. It's not flashy, not perfect, just honest. And that's where we'll leave this story. Not with a bang, but with a crust. You slice in. The crust resists just enough before giving way with that familiar, deeply satisfying crook. The crumb inside is soft and open. Steam curls up like a sigh. You don't rush it. You know better now. Real bread deserves presence. You sit down at your table, no phone, no screen, no distractions. Just the slice, the quiet, and you. You add a pat of butter. It melts instantly. A little sprinkle of salt. And with the first bite, it's all there again. The village oven, the monks, the ancient fields, the microbial magic, the failures, the wins, the starter you named after your dog, the night you forgot to score the loaf and it exploded sideways like a busted football. It's all baked in. This bread isn't just food, it's proof of change, of something rebuilt. You didn't just learn to bake, you unlearned the fear, the disconnection, the dependency on ultra-processed everything. You stopped accepting mystery ingredients with multi-syllable names and started trusting your own hands. You fed something living, and it fed you back. You created nourishment, one bowl, one rise, one bake at a time, and now it's part of you. You reflect on how far this loaf has travelled, not just across centuries but through cultural erasure, industrialisation, fear-mongering, and 30 years of carb panic. Bread got blamed for a lot of things, sometimes fairly but often not, and now we're seeing the slow return of sanity, one rustic crust at a time. People are learning, relearning, that it wasn't the bread. It was the system, the speed, the shortcuts, the lies that told you everything had to be fast, shelf-stable, and convenient to be worthwhile. The scholarly debate lives on, of course. Experts still argue over the exact mechanics. How much fermentation breaks down gluten, how to quantify microbial benefits, what levels of resistant starch survive baking temperatures. But beneath the spreadsheets and studies, there's something deeper happening. Millions of people all over the world turning back toward real bread, not as a trend, but as a homecoming. The science is finally supporting what tradition always knew. Bread, done right, loves you back. And here's your final quirky fact. There are sourdough starters still alive today that date back over 100 years. Passed from hand to hand, kitchen to kitchen, generation to generation. These aren't just ingredients, they're witnesses. They've survived world wars, pandemics, electricity outages, and TikTok trends. They are living history. You might be feeding one right now. Every time you bake, you're joining a chain older than any recipe book. It's humbling and kind of beautiful. So what now? You keep baking. Not every day, maybe not even every week. But when you can, when you need it. When someone you love is having a bad day, or when you want to reconnect to the earth, you experiment. Maybe try a new grain, a stuffed loaf, or a recipe with olives and herbs. You fail again. Burn a few crusts, underproof one, forget the salt in another, and end up with something that tastes like sadness. But you learn. You keep going. Because it's not about getting it right. It's about being with it. Maybe you teach someone else, a friend, a sibling, your kid. You pass on your starter, your notes, your tricks. You tell them, don't stress the crumb, just feel the dough. And maybe, years from now, they'll remember you every time they smell that tangy steam rising from a fresh slice. You realise too that the lessons bread teaches don't stay in the kitchen. Patience, observation, trusting the process, letting go of control. These things sneak into your work, your relationships, your sleep schedule. You start noticing where else in your life you've been rushing when you could have been rising. You look back at who you were before this journey started. The one who got bloated from a sandwich and thought bread was the problem. That person wasn't wrong, but they were missing context, missing time, missing real bread. And now you have it. So tonight, we'll close the oven door on this story. Not because bread is done with you, but because you've got what you need. You know how to feed it, how to care for it, how to read the signals. You know the smell of a good rise, the crackle of a cooling crust, the quiet joy of sharing a warm slice with someone who didn't even know they needed it. Take this last loaf and do what feels right. Eat it slowly, give it away, break it with someone you love, or just hold it for a minute and remember, this started with water, flour, salt, and air. And it turned into something you'll carry for the rest of your life. Not just bread, but a way of being. So now the oven's off, the flour's settled, and your last loaf is just a few crumbs and a memory. And that's okay. Bread, by its very nature, is temporary. It lives for a day or two, gets eaten, goes stale, maybe turns into toast or croutons, and then it's time to make another. That's the rhythm. That's the point. It's not a one-time miracle. It's a practice, a cycle, and maybe that's what makes it so comforting. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to keep showing up. You've walked through thousands of years of history, across medieval fields, monastic kitchens, village ovens, and modern fermentation labs. You've listened to monks knead in silence, seed savers whisper names of ancient grains, and sourdough nerds rant passionately about hydration percentages. You've seen how bread fell and how it's slowly rising again. And along the way, you probably felt something shift. Not just in your kitchen, but in your body, your routine, your thoughts around food and care and time. And hey, if you've made it this far, 30 sections deep, a few 100,000 crumbs later, it probably means something clicked, not in a dramatic life overhaul kind of way, but maybe in the way you now pause a little longer when you see a good loaf, or you check ingredient labels with sharper eyes, or maybe you just get weirdly emotional at the sound of crust crackling. Good. That means you were paying attention. Because this wasn't just a history of bread. It was a gentle reminder of everything we still can do. We can slow down. We can listen to our guts, literally. We can take back small parts of our daily lives from the systems that made everything fast, cheap, and lifeless. And we can do it with nothing more than our hands, a jar of starter, and a little flour. So now, as you turn off the lights and head to bed, maybe with a full belly or just a head full of ideas, know this. You're part of the rising now. You're part of the slow, quiet revolution. Every time you feed your starter, every time you shape a loaf, every time you gift a warm slice to someone who needs it, you're keeping something very old alive. And hey, that's more than just carbs. Sleep well, baker. You've earned it.